Michael, how you doing?
Good, good. How are you?
Good.
Thanks for having me on.
You're very welcome.
I've listened to a little bit of your podcast. They're enjoyable. I think you're going to go some places.
Thank you.
Yeah, places in plural.
Yeah.
Once you start having some interesting characters on, some interviews, some reshares, some shout outs from other people, people will want to help you.
Yeah, it'll get rolling. I had a friend yesterday telling me about marketing and how you gotta build it up like from your warm audience, right? And then you want to get as many likes and shares and follows as you can, and then word of mouth, and then you can start doing targeted advertising, things like that.
Yeah, I'm warm. You've warmed me up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So before we started, we were talking about a little bit about your past.
Yeah, you asked me for my life story. I've told it so many times. I feel sometimes inauthentic repeating myself. But the way I put it is, grew up autistic in ways that are difficult to tell at this point. Some people say that you can kind of grow out of it, but I do believe, and I've heard this from other people on the spectrum, that they had to teach themselves to mimic neurotypicality, and I think I've done a pretty good job of that. It felt like the world was in on a joke that I didn't get. I couldn't understand how people understood each other. I didn't understand because neurotypicals absorb subcommunication. They learn the full nonverbal context of communication, and there's a kind of fuzzy logic to it. When I was around 14, 15, I came to realize that people don't understand each other. The reason why I couldn't understand how people understood each other is because they don't. They just think they do. They nod, and people act, and this is what confused me. People act as if information comes from their brain and somehow replicates itself in the brain of the person they're communicating with, and that's not what happens. That is so far from what happens. And as being on the spectrum, there's a literalism is really what defines the way that a person on the spectrum, and I don't want to talk about the spectrum I can only talk about myself. I actually haven't done a lot of research. I just live it. But taking things literally is sort of our primary, first step, and then we have to work everything else out.
Did you ever see that movie Temple Grandin?
Oh, I loved it.
Right?
I loved it. What a beautiful thing.
So she'll hear animal husbandry, and she'll get this flash in her mind of cows at the altar getting married.
Yep. Yeah, that's words and the use of words, being precise. I really appreciate when words are clearly definable. In fact, it really bugs me when if it were up to me, there would be no synonyms. Each word would have some very subtle difference from what we would use as a synonym. And typically that's actually the case. There's subtle differences, but for most intents and purposes, you can use two words interchangeably because that difference doesn't matter. But in a world of my creation, every word would have a very precise subtle difference to it, and there'd be a reason why you would use a different word. And you know what? There is. If you're looking through synonyms, it's because one word will capture something slightly better than another, and there's a reason for that. And the way I experience the world, that reason is really important. So yeah, animal husbandry makes sense, you know. When you think of being a husband, actually, when you think about it, it's kind of sexist, really. If you look at it the other way around, I mean, is that what it means to be a husband? That your wife is cattle? Maybe that's kind of where how that term moved to cattle, or perhaps the other way around. You know, women were treated like chattel, so you were their husband, and being married and having a wife was a form of husbandry. Which that kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that I like the word,
No.
but I like it when words have distinct meanings. So yeah, when I think of animal husbandry, it totally makes sense that you would, like, I don't understand how you could see it really any other way. You know?
Yeah.
Why do we?
Because the way that I look at words like that, I had even though I knew that it's the same word, husband, I never made a connection in my mind between a human husband and the tending of cows. So it was like husbandry, although it's the same word meaning something different, it just takes on a completely different meaning. I don't even see the connection.
It's because he didn't marry a cow. I'm sure there's some men out there who might understand.
Yeah.
I'm just kidding.
It just shows the different ways that maybe you and I see words, right?
Yeah, that was a great film for. I mean, it's not nearly that extreme. I don't have a photographic memory.
Right.
I wish, although I imagine that comes with serious pitfalls. But I do kind of feel like a idiot savant in some senses, because I'm an intelligent guy, I think you could say, but
I do say.
But in I have a narrow range.
Yeah.
It's this core need for coherence and consistency in the way that I understand the world makes it kind of like I have one single way of understanding or modeling the world together.
Do you identify most with Spock from Star Trek?
No.
He's all logic.
He's a terrible trope of rationality. It's if I can't place something into my already pre-existing model of the world, then it's just free floating, and I can't make sense of it. So if I can't, I find if I had the ambition and all the time in the world, I would love to go into some form of like philosophy of education, because I really do think that we have, in a large sense, it backwards. The idea that, and this it kills me, that you can graduate from one level of learning, like in math, for example, like getting to calculus in grade 11 and having that be unfamiliar to you is a crime. You should be familiar with where you're going when you get started.
You know, Akam was telling me that our education system is actually terrible compared to
definitely
it's
only getting worse.
Yeah, places like, I can't remember what he said, Denmark and the Netherlands and Switzerland, places like that.
I think that calculus should be taught in grade school. I think that, and people will fight me on this, but it's what's important to understand when I say that is that kids should be exposed to it all. It should be very familiar where and how what they're learning fits into what they will be learning later, right? You don't test them on integrals when they're in grade school, but you can teach them the basics of calculus. I saw this this class where they were teaching kids the basics of calculus in elementary school, and it made sense to them. I'm practically innumerate, but I will sit and watch like hours long tutorials and videos on higher mathematics, and it's not, I'll understand what he's saying, but I couldn't for the life of me do it.
But you wish that you had been trained, so you could.
Had I started at the end and worked my way back, I think I would be a pretty good. I would be I think a brilliant mathematician for the kind of mind that I have. It's the basics. And this runs through everything in my life. My jiu-jitsu judo coaches, they would get frustrated because I would always be trying to do the fancy stuff. The first move that I did in the first tournament as a white belt in jiu-jitsu was a spectacular flying armbar. Beautiful. I didn't land it. I landed the move, but I had so much momentum when we got to the ground that he did exactly the right thing to prevent the actual submission part. But man, it was beautiful. The way I flew through the air, but the basics I always struggled with. So I was the guy that if you were stronger than me, I could muscle around anybody that I was stronger than, or somebody the same strength. I'd do pretty well, but that was rare. Usually, I'd be fighting guys bigger than me, and they would just muscle me into position. But if they left a space open for some fancy move, I'd strike. So all they had to do was just muscle me into one position. I had actually a pretty good reputation for, bad reputation for bruising people with my grip, because I have an incredibly strong grip from practicing judo and roofing and stuff. So I was really good at not getting submitted. I learned how you could muscle me around, but if I knew where you were going, I just hang on, and you couldn't. I was an immovable object. But anyhow, my point is, it was within 2 weeks of having first discovered that a flying armbar is a thing that I first did it, and nearly pulled it off the first time. And I would say, except for this one little Japanese girl I shouldn't have been doing it on because she was too short. She kept just collapsing to it every time I tried it. If you take her out of it, I'd say I've landed like into the actual on the ground armbar position, having thrown the person onto their back into that position, probably 70% of the time. But the simple basics for me to control the fight took me a long time to get good at. And maybe I'll bring up, if some other examples come to me, probably will, because this is true of everything I've learned. I have to start at the end and work my way back. And it doesn't. I haven't really captured exactly why that is, because it's true in everything. Like, why should I have to learn a flying armbar first? One of it probably is enthusiasm, because it's funner. But two, I need to know where I'm going. You know what I mean? So sitting and doing long division, it's it's in one ear and out the other. You know, I just realized last week, having gone back to construction, that I've forgotten my times tables. I was certain for a good, I don't know, 30 seconds that 5 times 6 was 40. And I said this out loud, and I was embarrassed, but I couldn't. I was shocked, because your times tables, again, it's just free floating information, right? But if there was a structure to it, any kind of mathematical structure to it, that I could put into some kind of graph, picture, geometric shape that was transformable into other information, I wouldn't lose it, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think I feel the same way when it comes to mathematics. Like, there's so many interesting things that you can do with mathematics that when you're learning math in high school and whatnot, you don't know that that's what it's for. So it holds no interest, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah. And for me, it just doesn't make any sense. Like it's you might as well be an adult in Charlie Brown. Womp, 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 womp. It makes no sense. So I grew up it wasn't until between 12 and 14 that I came to, up until about 13, I thought I was mentally disabled. I wouldn't call being on the spectrum, I wouldn't call me mentally disabled. Well, maybe. I mean, if I'm going to be compassionate with my use of mentally disabled, I do have a disability. But in grade 3, I was actually in a class with children like drooling on themselves, who had real, clear mental disabilities. I felt out of place, but I've also felt out of place in the regular class. I got to go swimming on Wednesdays. That was nice. I never had to take French. I blame that on the fact that the French don't know how to spell, and they need to get their own alphabet. Stop abusing ours. So I was basically told, everyone around me believed that I had mental disabilities.
Your family believed
cognitive disabilities. Well, I mean, my father has cognitive disabilities, I'd have to say. It could. My dad is clever. He's a clever man. He's even better than I am with judo. He was a real scrapper, more of a scrapper than me. But grade 6 education. And my mother also, I hate to say, low education. She grew up in what can definitely be called like white trash, like White Rock, when White Rock was, like white trash town. Sexually abused. Abused by my father. I took the brunt of the abuse. I don't want to overstate the abuse, but I was abused. No sexual abuse, thank God. And my father wished that I was a girl. And when I think I was 12. When my father thought it was perfectly fine to explain to his 12-year-old son that he wished I was a girl, as if this was just a matter of fact. And I remember when he told me that, like, this was before I had is this appropriate kind of module in my brain. I think most kids had that younger, but I didn't. But that wasn't appropriate, but I remember thinking that I already knew that. When I was 12, my parents split up. My mother had to run away from my father. And a story that that's retold in my immediate family to sort of illustrate the nature of my consciousness at the time. My father was chasing us around New Westminster, yelling that he was going to kill my mom. And we hid in a little shrub, and we could hear him running around screaming. And they were terrified. And I was excited because I had the latest issue of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I think number 11 came out, and it was epic. So I'm sitting here in a shrub with my father yelling that he's going to kill my mom, who's sitting next to me terrified with my little sister, or my big sister. She's 11 months older. And I'm excited reading a comic book, just sort of oblivious to what's going on. That's a clear sign of some kind of deficiency, but at the same time, I don't want to necessarily say it was a coping mechanism, but like not a mechanism, but it definitely helped me cope. And one thing I think there's, I guess maybe a way to put it would be like a friendly resentment that my sister has towards, not me and my sister couldn't be tighter, towards the fact that I never held anything against my father. I have no bottled anger because I never blamed him, because so I don't have to forgive him, which is fantastic because, well, I couldn't imagine how much harder my life would be to deal with if I also had to deal with emotional issues. I'm sure people won't believe me that I don't have emotional issues from my father, and I guess the neglect from my parents as a whole. But I don't, at least not in the sense that I feel like I need to forgive them for what they did. I always understood my father. I guess maybe because in my world there was something wrong with me, and so I guess like none of this is thinking. You don't really think about your environment, you just sort of know it. And I guess my father was doing the best that he could with what he had, which I honestly believe is true of everyone. We're doing the best that we can with what we have. And I think most people are well, almost everybody believes that they're a good person. Most people want to be a good person. And they're doing their best with what they have. And I didn't need to learn that. I just kind of took that for granted. So now my father doesn't have to redeem himself with me or apologize, but he has the same problem, which definitely helps him. He doesn't remember the abuse. Maybe if you really pressed him on it, he will admit that he was pretty awful when we were younger.
I think people can have amnesia about things like that, about both perpetrating abuse and being the victim of it.
Well, here's a great example, the story I was leading up to. I confronted my dad about him. We were Jehovah's Witnesses. Haven't got to that part yet. But my dad wears a hairpiece. He lost a good portion of his hair, started when he was like 22. And he would spend forever getting every little piece of hair in place to try to, blend it in and stuff. and he would try to do the same thing with me. And I'm this little blonde kid with ADD, autism, and we're preparing to go to the Kingdom Hall. And he would stand me with the blow dryer heating my head. I'm having a hard time standing still. I'm feeling faint. I feel faint enough just trying to stand still, let alone with you actively heating my head up with a blow dryer and trying to get every hair in place. He's yelling at me to stand still, and I won't, because I'm, 6 or 8? I don't know. I actually don't know. Young. He smacks me across the face with the brush and breaks it over my face. I confronted him about that, and he was honest and clearly convinced that my mother did that. So much so, he actually had me have to stop and think that maybe I could have a false memory of him breaking the brush over my face, and that it could have actually been my mom. And me, my mom, and my sister are pretty sure it was him. So, I mean, I'm not going to say that I don't have the false memory, but I know that I have the capacity for the false memory as much as he does. I'm going to say he did it.
Right. That's
and
one
that
thing.
He has the false memory that he's... So my father has gone... it's kind of like... He's a different person. My father, when he was enraged, he always had emerald green eyes. Mm-hmm. And when he was feeling good, he always had blue eyes. Like the Hulk would come out, the Green Hulk. And for quite some time now, several years now, my dad's been the blue-eyed old man. He actually had like a stroke thing. There's another good story after he was beat up by Union thugs, tied up, thrown overboard on the docks. He's a longshoreman. It's a good story. I should go back to that.
But that's one thing that...
he doesn't remember the abuse.
That's one thing that I noticed, though, about people sometimes. They can have blackout rage where they don't remember what they've done. They literally don't remember it.
That's true. Yeah. I suppose you wouldn't be necessarily wrong in saying that that's what this is. But I think to be a stickler with words, literally, blackout rage in terms of, it's true in a gradient sense, degree.
So they'll remember that they've done the thing, but they won't remember the details of it because just during the heat of the violence, their memory blanks.
What you're talking about, though, I think most people understand in a binary sense. You black out. You're having a blackout, the way you would have like a blackout when you're drinking.
Exactly.
Right?
There's no memory.
It's like
There's
episodic.
Literally,
you have an episode
of loss of memory.
Yeah, that wouldn't be
what this is. This is more of a selective non-remembering of a full event.
Well, an entire recreation of the memory.
Right, that someone else did it.
Yeah, he remembers it from a second person perspective.
Right.
Right? I don't know.
Do you think there's some kind of dissociation going on there?
Yes.
Yeah.
But I'm only being a stickler about the blackout rage thing. Just simply because I think most people understand that.
Yeah, I was just using it as an example. I wasn't saying that that's what it was, but people can do things and not remember.
Yes, I think there's degrees of it, and a blackout is like a difference in kind. But it's it's a difference in degree to the point of difference in kind. So like you can sort of misremember your behavior when you're drinking, but blackout drunk is an episode.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I'm sure my dad's had some blackout rage, but I think that he misremembers the abuse. I think it's kind of like alcohol.
That might be a
You're so
combination.
excited. There's so much going on in rage
Right.
that the recorder's fidelity is low.
So, and then, but you're saying it's a different kind. So it's like, it's a type of amnesia.
It's a difference
It's a
in
forgetting
degree.
of, but the blackout rage is like a heat of the moment loss of episodic loss. And then the sort of,
Yeah, the thing is, though,
he'll
is
misremember the whole thing.
the episode of rage would just be when he lost his patience and smacked
Exactly.
me with the brush.
He'll remember losing his patience and nothing after.
Yeah, see, that's the thing. He remembers the whole event as my mom telling me to stand still while she blow dries my hair. She loses her patience and
Right.
she breaks the brush.
Do you think that might be like an element of pathological lying? So it's a rewriting. That's what pathological lying does psychologically to a person. It rewrites history.
I think the
They
motives are
believe their own lies.
I think yes, but I also think that, well, I mean, a form of pathological self deception. Yeah, to put it in a stricter sense, definitely.
Yeah.
Pathological lying is interesting. I've known there's I guess I'm just going to say it. I've had members of family when they were younger suffered from what to me seemed like pathological lying. They would just say things that were clearly untrue, and it's wouldn't make any sense why they would ever think that they could get away with making bold empirical claims about their lives. And I have some sympathy for them because I can kind of understand that part of their brain that I guess you could kind of lose control over, that kind of fictionalizes your life, and the part where of misremembering later. I've actually had to, because my memory is poor. Like I was saying, 6 or 8. 6 or 8 will be my answer for a bunch of things that who knows. But I know 6 or 8 is a different Michael from the 3 to 4 Michael, and the 12 to 13 was a different from. So I remember which Michael it was, but what year of my life, what year something happened, that doesn't have a place in my brain. Just like it's free floating information.
I think that's pretty common. Memory is a lot poorer than people generally think.
Well, here's the question: when you really understand that, I had to like in the last couple of years, I've been haunted by this question of how bad is my memory now compared to what it was before, because I don't remember how bad it was before, right? And I would remember, you couldn't know. It's kind of, it's beyond your horizon of knowledge to know how poor your memory is compared to what you would have to remember well. I think I also have bipolar, and the episodic like phase changes of personality also plays a role. In fact, people untreated bipolar has been shown to have effects on memory. It depletes memory over time. And I have this running theory in my head, and I'm no expert at all, that part of this is state dependent learning, right? When you learn something in one particular state, or it's like a mood, or you feel like you're a different person. It's almost like that person is the one you have to like consult another person inside your brain to get that memory,
or at least a different state.
Yeah. So I subscribe, and I think neurology, neuroscience proves this out, as the Buddha taught, that the mind is modular, the brain is modular.
Right.
I don't believe in the self.
Yeah.
So there's always a different I that you're speaking from and about. When you say I, it's not the same one that it was 2 weeks ago or before this podcast. This is a very different frame of mind that I'm in. And I will remember and misremember things depending on my frame of reference. And being bipolar, shifting to like when I've been...
There's got to be research on that, eh? Because what he's saying right now is all backed by research. It's all been demonstrated. State-dependent learning is a real phenomenon. Who's he? You, Michael.
Oh.
Talking to the audience.
I just got a really bad Charlie horse.
Oh, dang.
Oh. Huh. What's funny is that I just started taking magnesium and stuff. Maybe I'm taking too much.
Yeah, maybe you got a calcium-magnesium imbalance in there.
Yeah. I haven't had that in a while.
Yeah.
I get them sometimes in my toe. Am I still centered?
I believe so, yeah.
Okay. I get them sometimes in my toe, and I've learned to sit with it. It's actually a great meditation when you get a cramp, toe cramp.
God, those are awful. I squirm out of those as quickly as I can.
Well, try sitting with it. Try observing it.
No, I get that. When I used to meditate, when I used to devote my life to meditation, sitting with pain is a big thing, right? You wanna understand that pain, learn how you can sort of mentally detach from that pain to whatever extent.
Yeah. Mentally detach is... Which
means not react in a negative emotional state, right? Like normally when we stub our toe, we get angry. Or
I don't like the term mentally detached.
Yeah.
And the reason is that what it is that you're trying to describe is something that's true when you're mentally detached already, past tense, right? You there's already the observer observing the pain. The ego that's attached to non-suffering while the suffering is happening, that ego, that I that's going to think, oh, I need to detach, is not capable of that, right?
Sure.
That part just needs to relax.
Yeah.
When you're detached, that you're observing, but that part was always there.
Yeah.
That part didn't move away from the pain.
Right.
There is no moving away from the pain.
Yeah. When I think about the sort of the Buddhist conception of attachment and detachment, I'm thinking more in terms of like, don't think of it as in a literal sense. It's kind of a metaphor, right? Like when if you every single time that something like pain happens, if you get angry, that's because there's this sort of metaphorical attachment of the mind to this body and this so it's almost like there's a direct connection between the pain and the mental state, so that it automatically causes a negative mental state, like some kind of emotional suffering. So the detachment is just the idea of learning that you can release the mind. It's like that's the sense of detachment, right? Release the mind from that automatic negative state that arises dependent on the pain in the body.
Yeah. And I don't believe that detaching is an event involved in that, in what it is that you're talking about. If you're trying to learn how to do this thing called detaching from pain,
Yeah.
then you're.
I think that's a fair description of it, though, because that is what happens. You realize,
It's a fair,
like,
but it's a fair.
you have disconnected that pain from the mental state. You have detached it from that, so that now the mental state can be in a state of calm tranquility with no negativity. It's a metaphor. It's not a real attachment. There's nothing attached.
Yes, but the suffering is the mental state.
Yeah,
and you're not releasing. I think is closer.
Okay.
Nothing really captures it, but you have to let the pain happen, right? And the part of you that is suffering the pain, that part of you doesn't detach from the pain, right? If there's pain, there's like your body doesn't want that to be happening, and it's pretty attached to, full homeostasis.
Yeah.
And it should be.
I see what you're saying. Yeah.
The observer is the part of you that doesn't that never had the attachments in the first place.
Yeah.
And meditation is a practice not of detaching, but sort of, it's closer to releasing the reins, in a sense.
Yeah.
So that you can see you can observe this happening.
Right.
Right? Your thoughts are happening to you. That pain is happening to you.
Mm-hmm.
And even that's wrong in a sense, because it's happening to your body, right? And I feel like I'm rambling.
No, what you're saying makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because the only reason why I say that is because
I don't think that Buddhist detachment,
the concept of there being an event of detachment led me astray.
Exactly. No, I agree. And I think I think Buddhism isn't entirely right. Their goal is to be to detach some element of mind from basically the material world or the body or the experience of feeling, to detach that. That's the goal. But is that possible? Is that a real thing?
It's funny. The last time that you and I talked, I think the tables might have turned a little bit. I've actually, since I last spoke to you, come more around to thinking that the Buddhists are entirely correct. And what do we mean by the Buddhists? About the cessation of consciousness. Remember that conversation when I was like, well, the problem
we were on
Buddhism
opposite sides.
Is that their end goal. Yeah, I was arguing. I wasn't necessarily arguing against what you thought, because I think you were sympathetic to my point.
Yeah.
I was ridiculing the idea that basically saying they're taking it too far. The practice of meditation is pointing in a direction, and they're seeing a goal out there, which, followed to its logical conclusion, is the complete cessation of consciousness. And I was ridiculing that idea.
Yeah.
And come around a little bit. I might not be able to explain how and why. I'd have to go through other really interesting things. Maybe we could get there.
Yeah.
But I have to admit, the idea of eventual non-existence, of complete cessation of consciousness, total misnomer. There's not an easy way to explain it. I think the source of confusion around Buddhism comes from us still lacking a way of talking about the world that doesn't presume a singular self, and it. I guess we don't need to formally transition into topics. I guess. Are you familiar with quantum immortality? Did we talk about that?
No.
Or quantum suicide?
No.
Many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics?
You mentioned that, yeah.
Oh, I'm sure I did. It sounds a whole lot more absurd, at the risk of making myself sound more wooish than I actually am. A healthy skepticism would maybe lower a person's sense of authority around my voice when I use the word quantum anything, talking about philosophy.
Right.
But the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics is clearly, in my opinion, the simplest, most parsimonious, and the idea, I don't to not assume too much, but basically, what we call particles. We've been locked in. Democritus locked us into this frame that the world is made out of discrete objects. And then when we discovered the atom, we thought that he was entirely correct. And we've since found out that that's actually not true. There's a third alternative. And we have yet a language to talk about it. There are no such thing as particles. That's just simply an anachronism.
I was dating a girl. Her father was a physicist. He used the word wavicles.
Don't like it at all.
No, wavicles.
A particle is an excitation in a quantum field. For every particle, it's not that we have a collection of particles. Is we have a collection of quantum fields. For each particle, there's a quantum field where every point in space has a number assigned to it, and for almost all particles, that number is 0 at every point in space, except for where we say there's a particle, which is an excitation. It's just a non-zero number, right, in a field of numbers.
So first of all, quantum physics is something a lot of people like to talk about, and they don't really know anything about it. So How much time have you actually spent studying quantum physics? Because people are going to just right off the bat wonder if you're full of shit.
Quantum mechanics, I first read A Brief History of Time. In fact, A Brief History of Time was the first non-Jehovah's Witness science book I read. I read it when I was 14.
Yeah.
14 or 15. I think the first time when I was 14, and reread it several times between then and 16. I found the audiobook. I listened to it over and over again. And Richard Feynman's Sum Over Histories.
Hawking's got to be one of the most brilliant physicists of our time, right?
Oh, it is incredible. Yeah. But that book has not aged well.
No, but he revised his theories and whatnot, didn't he?
Yeah, he was very humble. He actually enjoyed finding out he was wrong. But when I read the part where he's talking about Richard Feynman's Sum Over Histories, explaining that the way to it was an ingenious way of solving for the wave collapse or the path of a particle.
Can you explain that a little bit?
Well, I'll keep it really simple,
and
basically just say that to talk in terms of particles, a particle going from point A to point B doesn't go by a single path. It goes by all possible paths. And that idea on its own is probably the most critical concept that broke me out of my religious belief on its own. I extrapolated from that a personal God cannot exist. And that sounds silly. But and if you read A Brief History of Time, which I would say don't waste your time. There's much better up-to-date books. If you do, get the illustrated version because it's fantastic. You'll see that there was nothing in there about the many worlds interpretation. I invented it on my own, just drudging over. Remember, this was 1994.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
By 1995, I remember sitting in my bed, contemplating this idea, and at that time, in his book, it wasn't. He didn't correct, I don't believe, until The Universe in a Nutshell, a follow-up book, that the singularity, cosmic singularity, if you rewind the universe back to the Big Bang, by general relativity, it should shrink to an infinitesimally small point. Well, Schrodinger's or the Heisenberg uncertainty principle would say that that's impossible, because then you would have a definite position and velocity of particles. They'd be zero. You can't even have that. And I remember thinking, well, if you rewind it all back to that point, and you just extrapolate from Heisenberg's uncertainty principle and Schrodinger's equation, then shouldn't the universe have banged in every possible way? And and the other concept combined with that would be, I guess, the concept of wave dynamics. In fact, just wave dynamics is probably the core concept. The way I like to sum it up, just to refresh, if people probably already know this or don't know that they know this, but when a wave crest hits a wave trough, they cancel each other out.
Yeah.
And when a crest hits a crest, it doubles, right? So you can take this is how noise canceling works, but technically you could take in principle, two speakers blasting the inverse wave pattern of sound at each other, and you stand in the middle and you'll hear silence, right? You got two pounding speakers, and you're hearing silence. Because
would you hear silence though? Because they haven't met until the middle, like past your ears. But I see what you're saying. They do cancel each other out.
Yeah, I'm saying in principle.
Yeah.
And yeah, you're right. I guess that that space would leave for there to be probably some kind of hum or something. So I had this idea of this infinitesimally small point of infinite energy. That all cancels itself out, and but by Heisenberg's uncertainty principle and the Schrodinger equation, you have every possible next moment of that energy. And I just I envisioned it all sort of superimposed upon themselves, right? Like the sum of our histories.
So wait, are you saying because all possible worlds would exist, that there would be the opposite of each possible world, so they cancel each other out?
Yeah, they would. It would be a equilibrium point of pure energy, right? That's what you get when like virtual particles cancel each other out. So. Imagine taking all physically possible universes and just superimpose them upon each other, right? If you had every possible universe on top of itself, they would all cancel each other out, and you would essentially have that singularity, right? And but where we are in that equilibrium, we're just slightly away from the equilibrium where we can't see that silence, that energy silence. We can only see one side of the cancellation. The way that virtual particles that in a technical sense don't exist. The universe, the way quantum mechanics makes sense of a lot of things involves particles that don't exist. They randomly, I hate that word, pop into existence and then annihilate with themselves. But they do so. The positive virtual particle cancels out with the negative particle. One is moving forward in time and one is moving backwards in time, and they cancel out their own duration. So you can't say that they ever existed. The sum of the time that they existed is 0, because one is moving forward in time and one is moving backwards in time. That concept is what I've extrapolated to my
Is that like a known thing?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So how many hours, say, have you spent watching videos on this stuff, reading books?
Oh,
Innumerable hours. So
but I don't want to.
This is kind of an area.
Overstate it.
No, but
because I haven't studied it formally.
But
I understand.
Yeah.
I understand the concepts.
Hey, if it's something that you've devoted like a good chunk of time to, that you're worth listening to on the subject, you know, you don't have to know how to do the math. I don't think if you can get the concepts. If
you're doing like philosophy, let other people do the math.
Yeah.
I would, if I had to sell people on my own credibility, given my incapacity to work my way the way that you're supposed to through formal education, what I would sell myself on is my when I was 15, when I, as far as I'm concerned, discovered that a personal God is logically impossible. And then...
Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Actually, yeah. Well, let me lead up to it, actually.
Sure.
When I was 16, my mother went to Alberta to take care of my aunt, who just found out that she got AIDS from my uncle, who shortly after committed suicide. My mother went there, understandably, picked up to leave to go be with her sister, and I refused to go. I was 16 at the time, because when we lived there for a year, when I was 12, and I was bullied badly, and I refused to go back. Like, I got no help from teachers. In fact, I remember the teachers kind of sympathizing with the bullies more than me. Anyhow, I refused to go. So like she had with my sister the year before, she signed me over to welfare, and I got a roommate. And remember, this is within a year of coming out of this bubble I lived in as an autistic Jehovah's Witness. I knew nothing about the world. I got a roommate and an apartment next door to the library in New Westminster, and I dropped out of school to educate myself out of that library. I remember the conversation that I had with Jehovah. I told them, we need to take a break. I know I'm not supposed to do this, but in order for me to feel the commitment that I need to have towards you, I need to go find out how to understand the world in the way that educated people understand the world, and find my way back. Because when I was 14, my first girlfriend that I lost my virginity on, I preached to her. I wanted her to accept God's gift and live with me in paradise on earth forever. Everyone, not only did everyone that I knew when I was a child see me as having cognitive disabilities, they also, just about everybody I knew well, believed that I was physically immortal. That as long as I was a good boy, I would never die. And if I did, it would be very temporary. I would immediately wake up in the new system during the 1,000-year reign when we resurrect all the people who didn't die during the flood or Armageddon.
They all believe that about themselves as well?
Yeah. And we would recreate the planet to be the Garden of Eden as God intended. And we would live in that garden as if Eve hadn't have eaten of the tree of knowledge, and we'd be given access to the tree of life and continue to live forever. Kind of makes sense when you patch the story together that way. So at 15, or 15, 16, 15 was when I had the aha about the nature of God. I do believe in God. I just don't believe in a personal God. And then at 16, when I was educating myself in the library, one of the topics that I immediately went to was evolution. And my favorite book growing up was the How Did We Get Here by Evolution or Creation. And looking back at that book, it's the distortion is so clearly deliberate. But anyhow, so finding out that I was lied to about that, finding out that
I do
my
wonder, though.
entire world,
You say deliberate.
They're
But is it, though? Or is it self-deception?
Well, both, but it's organizational and structural. Yeah. The people who write the literature are instructed on what conclusions they need to draw, right? There was Raymond Franz, who was the nephew of the is it president? Do they call them presidents? I forget now. The head of the governing body, the head of everything. His nephew, his namesake, was also Raymond Franz. One of the governing body anointed 144,000 that go to heaven and to judge us at Armageddon. They get to become angels while we live on earth. It's another famous Jehovah's Witness doctrine. He left in 1981. It was a big fiasco, and there's a great book he wrote on it called Crisis of Conscience. He was directed to write what was these big domes. Guide to Spiritual Understanding was a subtitle. I forget what they are. They've been replaced since then. But they're like an encyclopedia of their doctrine. And he was instructed to write about the 607, 587 discrepancy in history. The original, I guess I'll catch the viewer up on the basis of Jehovah's Witness doctrine. Back in the 1800s, there was the Millerite movement, and they had, I think his name was George Miller, created this way of calculating different dates and came up with predictions of when Armageddon would happen. And he was famously wrong, I think in the 50s or something, or 70s. And from that, a bunch of people corrected him, and they came up with all their own dates. And Charles Taze Russell, Pastor Russell, who was the heir to a publishing company and a good speaker, published large amounts of sermons, and his prediction was that Armageddon was going to happen in 1914. World War One happens in 1914, so you have thousands of readers who believe that World War One is Armageddon. But part of the calculations is there's 2,500 and something days years from 607 BCE gets you to 1914. Well, Neo-Babylonian chronology has corrected that date to 587, when Nebuchadnezzar was conquered by. I'm totally rambling, but anyhow, Raymond Franz was instructed to defend the 607 date, which Jehovah's Witnesses, I believe, alone, maybe with the Bible students and other similar sects, are hanging on to this date that this event happened in 607, when we know through thousands of cuneiform documents that it was 587. And he ended up leaving because he didn't feel right. When he did the research, he realized that they were wrong, but they made him nevertheless write it to defend what he thought was wrong. So I discovered all of these things when I was 17, and my point here is, if I had to sell people on my credibility, I would say I've got this chip on my shoulder that my personality from that point on has really defined me. I felt betrayed. The idea of having my whole world be, for lack of a better word, a lie, living a lie or deception or an illusion. That is like my cornerstone. So I'm not desperate to be right. I'm desperate to not be wrong. My core value is self-honesty. So if I find myself believing something without enough evidence, I know that I'm doing it. Yeah. And I have a sense of shame around that. So if I'm not trying to be right. So I have, at least with myself, I don't want to deceive other people. I don't want to lead people down the wrong path. I don't want to say that I've studied quantum mechanics, but I have a good understanding of my understanding of it, let's just say. I would say go read some good books on it. But I have a unique way of putting it together. But to get back to what I was leading to, the idea of all possible universes all superimposed upon themselves, all canceling out, creating that energy silence. That is how I understand God, but not in the sense of physics, but metaphysics. If you superimposed all logically possible worlds from the frame of reference of an omniscience, they would all cancel each other out. And we're kind of like, Hawking is famous for Hawking radiation. He proved that based on the assumptions, solid assumptions, that black holes will naturally evaporate their content.
Right.
And the way that this happens, a good way to imagine it, is that these virtual particles that pop in and out of existence, when they go from popping into existence to finding each other and annihilating, they're going by every possible path, right? That's the sum over histories that Feynman used I can't even fathom how they can sum these things, but if where that's at a black hole horizon, that point where gravity is so strong that even light can't escape,
Yeah.
which means nothing can escape, virtual particle pairs that appear along that horizon, if one of the pairs goes beyond that horizon
And the other pair
and
does
the other
too?
doesn't,
Oh, doesn't.
then you've got a real particle,
Okay. I see.
right? It's no longer virtual.
So it's escaped. Was that Hawking's
It's
realization?
Hawking radiation. Yeah.
Okay.
It was the first theory to use both quantum mechanics and general relativity.
Okay. We actually talked about black holes on one of the podcasts. Maybe you can clarify. So what I had said was that there was a theory back when Einstein was theorizing about it, that there was a white hole, and so what disappeared into the black hole went through a wormhole and was shot out of a white hole.
Yeah.
So
What is it called?
Einstein-Rosen bridge. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then Hawking disproved that, right? With Hawking radiation. Wasn't that a sort of answer to that? So Hawking, no, because what I had thought was that instead of the stuff going through a rip in the fabric of space-time and reappearing elsewhere, it was actually still in the middle of a black hole in a singularity. And then over time, due to Hawking radiation, it would eventually all exit that space.
Well, I mean, not a black hole and a wormhole are different objects, right? The idea of a white hole, there's not a lot of talk about it because it's purely theoretical, but basically it's the other end of a wormhole.
It wasn't, because I thought the idea was that a black hole, that there was a theory. It might not be that, but it's a theory that what went into a black hole reappears elsewhere. Like that's a rip in space-time, and it goes through it and leaves this universe. That was a theory.
Well, I mean, there's a very real sense in which that could be the case if you're talking about different universes, but a wormhole is within the same universe.
Okay.
Again, depending on what you're calling universe, because if it's beyond our event horizon.
But does Hawking not think that the matter that gets sucked into a black hole is inside of it in a singularity? I thought he did.
Well, this is the thing, and it's another thing that really bugs me about the way that quantum mechanics is talked about. A better way to talk about it, like conservation of energy, is actually just an example of conservation of information. What Hawking, the concern that he raised through his study of black holes, was that his theories seemed to point to the conclusion that the information that made its way into a black hole was forever lost. Right?
Now you're calling it information as opposed to matter.
Yeah, because that's what it is.
In terms of quantum understanding.
Matter is.
Matter, because we used to think of matter as actual particles, right? We used to think of it as indivisible, particles. But then, so you're saying that from a quantum perspective, it's better understood as information?
Everything is better understood as information. The world is information.
But if it's not a substance, like if it's because matter.
How can it be a substance?
Well, you know how there's the laws of physics, right? There's mass. Objects have mass.
Yeah, but mass is more of an emergent property than it is an inherent property.
Right.
A thing doesn't have mass. It interacts with the Higgs field. So like any massless particle, uh, experiences no events between like a photon bouncing off of something. It is timeless until it reaches something else, right? Massed particles have an event at every point in space because the Higgs field is unique in that it has a positive value at every point in space. Things that interact with the Higgs field cannot go from one point in space to the next without interacting with the Higgs field.
So what is the Higgs field?
The Higgs field is what gives massless or mass particles their mass, and it's a misnomer to say that they have mass, because what mass really is it's just simply the capacity to in a sense experience time.
But what is the Higgs field? Why does it give up its mass?
Well, I don't think it has to do with exchanging what is it called? It's the weak force. Like, why is the wrong word, I think, in physics. It's more like how. So, I mean, without risking being wrong needlessly, what would be a good way to explain this? Photons are a massless particle.
Right.
And there's some episodes of PBS Spacetime that you totally have to watch to understand mass. It's great, but I'll try to sum it up real quick. If you had what I forget his name, the guy calls a photon box. So massless walled box of photons that are bouncing off of these massless walls. That box that has nothing but photons, massless photons, itself has mass. It has mass because of the interactions, the bouncing of the photons off the wall. If you push that box, the bouncing of the particles is going to be heavier on the side that you're pushing, because you're going to be pushing the wall into the photons.
Uh-huh.
So you're going to experience mass trying to accelerate that massless box of massless objects.
So are you saying that like massless particles play a role in the sort of creation of mass?
No, I'm saying that all particles are massless. But mass comes from interactions. And so a particle that interacts with a field that's perfectly ubiquitous cannot go from one point in space to the next without experiencing an event, right? So it's kind of like, moving through water versus moving through molasses, right? You're constantly the interactions that you have. I think like spin would be an example. It's difficult to understand the concept of chirality in particles, but if a particle is changed from every point in space, it traveling from point A to point B is going to experience all of these transformations at every point in space. A photon doesn't interact with the Higgs field, so it travels through space through remember how I was saying particles are not their excitations in a field, and those fields are a number assigned to each point in space. Well, that number is 0 for every point in space for almost all particles, but the Higgs is unique in that it has a positive number. So to talk in particle sense, there's a Higgs particle at every point in space, but the other particles, they're dispersed, right? So a photon is just going to fly uninterrupted until it happens to hit another particle, whereas a massed particle, every point in space, it's interrupted with an interaction with a Higgs particle. It's constantly experiencing events.
Okay. One other question. There's like the laws of physics are tuned, they say, just so that that if they were a little bit higher or a little bit lower, that life couldn't exist, that the universe couldn't exist as it does. Do you know anything about that?
Well, I do, but it's kind of backwards. I mean, you say that because you're here,
Right.
but imagine again that
All
energy
possible.
silence, all possible universes,
Yeah.
all superimposed upon each other.
So do
You're
you
away
think
from that equilibrium in a space where life can exist.
so you think all possible worlds exist?
I believe
Exist.
all logically possible worlds exist.
Right. And you this is one of them, and the universe happens to be tuned in this way, so we happen to exist. So it's actually not like it's actually not such a surprise that that it's tuned in just the way that we exist, because all
Well,
possible worlds exist. With that,
Yeah. In order to make that statement, the universe has to be such that beings there to ask the question, why is the world the way that it is? Any being in any possible world
right,
asking the question, why is the world the way that it is, such that I am here?
right.
The world had to be that way in order for them to ask the question.
But you think the reason why a universe like this exists is because of what we've learned from quantum physics, that
No, I
all
believe
possible.
the universe such as this exists because there's no such thing as one that doesn't exist. The reason why it's difficult to understand, it seems like I'm saying a lot more than I am, is that the word exists only has meaning from your reference frame. It's an indexical term. When you say that something exists, you mean that it's within, it has a temporal and or spatial relationship to the speaker making the statement, right? So in another possible world, the thing that you can say with a definite truth value doesn't exist here. Well, if it's logically possible to exist, there's a world at which it does exist.
Right. But
right?
what I'm saying is that there are people who wonder why the laws of physics of this universe are tuned so perfectly. They use this as evidence for a creator God. Because they don't have much else that they can say that a creator God did, because the laws of physics account for it all. But why are the laws of physics the way they are? And if you're right, like if there are all possible worlds, right, that this is just one of them, and it's not a surprise that it exists.
Well, Lee Smolin has a great model of how Darwin could solve that problem. Here's Darwin. I don't know if you can see my Rockstar Darwin on my shirt.
I love that shirt.
Yeah.
That's great.
That the universe doesn't appear finely tuned for life. That idea is completely absurd when you examine it. The universe is entirely, like as near as you can possibly come to being entirely uninhabitable for life.
Huh.
Right? I mean, if you were randomly popped into any place in the universe, you would die.
Huh.
Like there's almost zero, an infinitesimally small.
What about the fact that there
chance that you're
are
gonna land somewhere where you can live?
What about the fact that there are an estimated some odd billion Goldilocks planets in the Milky Way galaxy?
Yeah, well,
I know what you mean in terms of the vastness of space, but there may be a lot of inhabitable places in the universe, right?
Yes, but Lee Smolin's argument is that the universe is actually more fine-tuned for creating black holes than it is for creating universes. And he has a supposition, hypothesis.
Creating what? Creating
black holes.
No, you said more fine-tuned to black holes than creating universes, or creating...
It's more fine-tuned
Yeah.
for the creation of black holes than it is for habitable life.
Habitable life, yeah.
Like by leaps and bounds.
We were
orders of
talking about black holes.
magnitude.
Black holes are really interesting, right? So
Well,
you've got these galaxies where they're collections of stars, and at the center of galaxies is the highest concentration of stars. And then when a lot of mass gathers in a certain spot, a black hole forms, right? And so eventually so many black holes form in the center of a galaxy, and they all combine, and then they devour the whole galaxy, right?
Yeah, I mean, they don't have to necessarily combined, like the whole thing could fall into itself. A supermassive black hole is going to consume a lot of things, and some of those things will be other black holes.
Well, right.
But Lee Smolin's
But they grow,
idea is
so they
that-
grow. They continue to grow as they eat more matter,
Yeah, but it does reach a point
Matter.
at which everything left is orbiting it.
Yeah.
Right. At the center of our galaxy, like most galaxies, you can see things orbiting at incredible speeds.
Okay.
Because they're like at the sinkhole.
Yeah.
But the black hole will devour everything in its realm, and you'll have like this ring of light of super fast orbiting objects that are either in a relatively stable orbit, creating like a ring. That's actually what black holes are going to look like when we can find them.
Yeah.
Is a ring.
We've seen that.
blackness.
There's one now.
Yeah.
There's one image, right? Is that a small black hole, or is that like a galaxy supermassive? Is that a okay?
Well, that's the only place we really know to look for them, right? At the center of
the galaxy, the center of the Milky Way, we can't see them, right?
Yeah, like the only place to look would be where we know there was a supernova, or the center of a galaxy. And the center of a galaxy is where you're going to find one that's big enough for us to observe at this point.
Well, okay, hold on. But because the idea is that when they have devoured an entire galaxy, it becomes a very, very large event. So that's where we can.
If they engulf the entire galaxy, there would be no galaxy there.
No, well, it's while they're devouring it, then it's called a quasar, and we can see those. It's not a very interesting image. It looks like a star. It's just a blob of light, but it's a quasar. A quasar is a galaxy being devoured by supermassive black holes.
A quasar is just any black hole that's devouring mass faster than it can consume it.
But it's as far as
it doesn't have to be a galaxy.
I think it usually is. A quasar is the death of a galaxy. I'm gonna Google that.
Well, I mean,
what is a quasar?
It's
according to Wikipedia, a quasar is an extremely luminous active galactic nucleus in which a supermassive black hole with mass ranging from millions to billions of times the mass of the sun is surrounded by a gaseous accretion disk. Okay,
so it's a galactic nucleus. It's the center of a galaxy, right?
Yeah.
I just heard it described as the death of a galaxy.
That seems weird to me because there would still be galaxy left in many cases.
Well, that would be the matter that hasn't yet been devoured. That's why it's bright, right? Because it hasn't devoured it all.
I'm thinking,
but it's in the process.
I think the difference here is that I'm thinking of what is that called? The spout of gamma radiation that comes out the center. What is that called? It's the most explosive, highest energy event known outside of the Big Bang. What is it called? You know what I'm talking about, right?
The jet that comes out
the jet of gamma radiation.
The poles.
Yeah, that's like the black hole burping because it's consuming more mass than it can digest to put it into.
Right. Exactly.
Simple terms. Now I need to remember what that's called. So yeah, you were talking about quasars. I was talking about that jet.
Yeah.
What is that called?
I just call it a jet.
Yeah, but there's a cool
term. Yeah.
Anyhow, but to get back to Lee Smolin, he hypothesizes that the reason why the universe looks fine-tuned for the creation of black holes. Like there's, if you change the constants slightly, you would have, in any way, you'd have less black hole formation. And what he hypothesizes is that at the center of a black hole, you have the makings for another universe. It's kind of like, if you imagine, the whole like gravity bending, mass bending, space-time, you like a bowling ball on a mattress, and the orbit is like a marble, going around it. Well, a black hole is like putting a pin through the mattress, so it's like bending into a point.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, the pin breaks through the fabric of the universe. And his hypothesis is that, well, it's true. Well, I believe it's true, that there's all the makings for a Big Bang at that singularity point.
I mentioned this in one of the podcasts as well, that some people say that there might be universes in the center of black holes.
Yeah.
Why is that? And wouldn't it be less matter than this?
Think about that singularity, that cosmic singularity that can exist.
Yeah.
And it can exist because that matter cannot have both a position and velocity, a discrete position and velocity at the same time. It can't exist in a single point. It exists in all possible points. Well, that singularity at the center of a black hole should be the same, right? If you have the sum of all energy that the universe is made of is zero, right? That's all you need. And that and inflation, like the space inflating faster than the speed of light, and dark energy coming to fill that space, is all you need to make another universe. So if
explain
you
the
would
logic
have all
to me,
these
because
budding baby universes.
This is baffling to me. So why? Why? So you've got this extreme bending of space-time and matter falling into it. Why would a universe like a Big Bang occur there?
Because you would have a singularity, and you'd have...
So everything would be infinitesimally compressed? Or...
in only mathematically so.
Yeah.
Because it's physically impossible...
To be infinitesimal like that?
No, to have a single
point
position
and velocity. Yeah.
Right?
So that wouldn't happen.
At each singularity, quantum fluctuations, one of those is going to be another Big Bang.
Yeah.
Right? So if you like the heat death of the universe, if the universe keeps expanding and the rate at which it's expanding is accelerating, there's going to be a point at which the universe is so big that particles are so separated from each other. The way to understand this is if you put points on a balloon and you inflate the balloon, what's expanding is not the stuff, it's the space between the stuff. So you blow this balloon up, you watch those points you put on your balloon moving away from each other.
Yeah.
That's what the universe is doing as it expands.
Right.
Eventually you'll have heat death, where it's expanded so much, particles are so far away from each other that there's no interactions.
Right. You're not a proponent of the Big Crunch contraction?
No, we know that
doesn't happen.
No, it can't. The fact that the acceleration of the universe is itself accelerating eliminates that as a possibility.
Okay.
I was about to explain an alternative cyclical universe model, which is what the Big Crunch is. The heat death at which no heat is generated because particles aren't bouncing off of each other because they're so far away from each other, you still have all the virtual particles popping in and out of existence. It's one of those ways, well, a whole set, an infinite set of ways, well, maybe not infinite, but some set of ways that that virtual particles could come into existence would include the makings for a new Big Bang, right? So you have the universe expand to its heat death, then you have some uncountable amount of time passing where a Big Bang happens purely by statistical mechanics, right? Smolin's idea is that that every time a black hole forms, you're having you're creating a singularity that's just like ours. So it would be like a white hole, like what you were talking about. I don't hear that term used much.
No.
White hole.
No,
it's
no.
not really. I don't think well formalized object. But if for every black hole there was a new universe with its own set of constants.
And the other question I have is, what space does this new universe occupy? If it's inside the center of a black hole and it's going to expand to maybe be the size of this universe, where where is it? Is it outside of this universe? Is it inside the black hole, but the dimensions are entirely different? Or
well, inside a black hole, this is a really mind-boggling reality that we do know about black holes.
Yeah,
is that, and me saying these words, it can only point you to go and try to figure out what these words mean. But the time and space dimensions of space-time reverse. So the moving through time, you move through time in the way that you move through space, and you move through space the way you move through time. So space becomes a linear line pointed directly at the singularity, and space, and time, it becomes a dimension of space. It's a really difficult thing to wrap your head around, but at a certain point when you're falling into a black hole, moving around is moving through time, and moving through space is just simply moving in a unidirectional like singular dimension pointed directly at the singularity. I don't know how it's possible to understand what I'm saying just simply from what I'm saying. But the space certainly wouldn't be inside the black hole, and it wouldn't be inside this universe. It would be a universe of itself, right? The nature of space, I don't think we fully understand, but we know that it's expanding and that it probably went through a phase of inflation where the space, not the matter or energy, like balloons at far, far faster than the speed of light.
So faster than the actual matter of the universe.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, that's the thing. When you talk about the speed of expansion of space, it's a misnomer, because speed is like the time it takes to travel some length of space. But when the space itself is expanding,
Yeah.
then the space is what defines the speed of an object.
Yeah.
So it's not the same thing as speed, right? The way it fits the calculation the same, because an object that is far enough away from you is moving away faster than the speed of light from you. But the space isn't really going anywhere, right? Inflation isn't the universe expanding out into some metaverse. It's the space inside inflating, right? So
It's very confusing because you can only think of it. You can only think of it as a substance, right? Like I imagine space as this black elastic stuff that is expanding.
yeah,
And it would have a speed, and it would have a shape too. It would be a big ball that
Yeah.
everything happens inside.
it might not exist.
Yeah.
Space might actually be an emergent property, and there are a lot of physicists who actually believe that that's the case. The universe is better described, more parsimoniously described in pixels than it is voxels, like three-dimensional pixels. The third dimension may be an illusion. The information that goes into a black hole, what settled the bet that Hawking had with Susskind, the guy who came up with string theory. Susskind was saying that black holes can't destroy information. If information were not conserved, quantum mechanics couldn't make sense. And Hawking was saying so much the worse for quantum mechanics. But what they found in the math was that the information that enters a black hole is preserved on the event horizon. If this is all really difficult to understand,
Absolutely.
trying to
When I think of an event horizon, I just think of a point in space that is the point of no return from which light and matter and energy can't escape.
if you're inside it,
Yeah.
you wouldn't know you passed it. But if you're watching somebody fall into a black hole,
Yeah.
when they reach it,
Yeah.
the image you see of them would pause
Yeah.
at the horizon. And
Or it would disappear, wouldn't it?
nope, they'd pause. Time would stop for them, according to you. Because the light that's trying to escape the black hole reaches a point where the gravity pulling it in
Yeah.
is equal to the energy
That's bizarre. So
radiation.
it would just stick there.
it would just pause, it would stop.
What about
You would watch this astronaut or whatever moving around, but you would watch time slow down for him. He would go into slower and slower motion.
Yeah.
And when he reaches the event horizon, he would pause.
So you're saying there's some kind of like a map of everything that's gone in on the outside?
Well, we know that there is.
But what if something else goes in the same spot? Doesn't it cancel out what was there before?
There's, for the person who's entering in the black hole,
Yeah.
one way of describing how space and time reverse their roles is that you would technically watch the universe, the history of that black hole, in reverse, because that would be true of all these particles, all the photons that transmit the information of events. You would be traveling past them, right? You would be going through these layers of events, but from the outside, you'd only see the final event. there's so many ways to misunderstand everything that I'm saying that I'm skeptical that that I'm making sense. What was your question?
So what's the point of this? The fact that it's all the information is on the outside.
Well, here's a really fascinating fact: is that from every point in space there is an event horizon. If you go like far enough away from any point in space, is the point at which space objects in space are moving faster than the speed of light, which the speed of light should be called the speed of causation or causality. There's away from any point in space is a length at which space is expanding such that events cannot have any effect on that point. So in a very real sense, they're not in this universe. It's outside the cosmic event horizon. A really fascinating concept. I forget how to pronounce it. Like Urey radiation, something like that. The Hawking radiation that happens at an event horizon of the virtual particles popping in and out of existence, and then one becomes a real particle.
Which has escaped the event horizon.
That's happening at some point, some very discreetly definable point away from where you are.
Okay, so explain that, because that's way over my head.
Of particles that are popping into existence and becoming real particles
in this universe.
Only true for you and not for me.
So from the farthest point from me?
Yeah.
Why?
Because the virtual particle that falls into the space within your event horizon.
And what do you mean event horizon? Like that's a black hole term. What are you saying? My event horizon.
Yeah, you have an event horizon.
Why?
There is a because from the point, if we pretend that your consciousness is a point, in all directions, space is expanding, and the further away it is, the faster it's moving.
Is that a fact? The further away it is, the faster it's moving?
Yeah.
So it's because you're saying it's inflationary. It is accelerating in speed. So the further points to where you're moving faster.
Yeah.
Okay.
So there's a point at which, from your reference frame, that space is expanding faster than the speed of light. Yeah. So one of the particle-antiparticle virtual pair is the
you mean the
space
particles
is expanding
of me?
So fast.
You mean my particles? I have antiparticle pairs? Like,
no.
Well,
this is difficult to get your mind around because it's different for you than it is for me. Yeah. Right? Yeah. Where my horizon is about a meter away. So there's going to be a meter of virtual particles that will, within your event horizon, become real, but not in mine. Yeah. They'll annihilate with each other from my reference frame.
Okay. So what does that mean?
Well, I mean, I didn't mean for it to extrapolate major... this was what I was getting to. So, in a very real sense, that the information that is within the event horizon relative to the reference frame of the center point of your head, that all the information is captured on a two-dimensional film, just like the event horizon of a black hole. All the information of what's inside the black hole is recorded on a two-dimensional film. A two-dimensional, like, film is a good word for it. Yeah. And
so this is in any direction I should choose to point.
In every direction.
In every direction. So you're saying that there's actually a two-dimensional film that's in the shape of a sphere.
Yep.
Around me.
Yep. Around every point in space.
Around every point. Yeah.
And the idea that extrapolates from this is that the two-dimensional film is actually what exists, and the three dimensions is kind of like a projection. The idea of the Fourier wave form or holographic film, the holographic principle is what I'm talking about, comes from string theory, and basically it's the idea that that three dimensions are the third dimension is actually a projection from two dimensions.
From a two-dimensional event horizon?
Well, hang on for a sec.
Yeah.
So a piece of holographic film is actually Fourier waveforms, like wave patterns recorded on this piece of film. If you shine light through any point on that film, you get the whole projected 3D image, right? So it's kind of like a map of where the waves and troughs would be as photons would be reaching your eye, kind of thing, right? Or a camera. So in that flat piece of holographic film, you have the whole three dimensions of the apple. If it's an apple hologram, imagine an apple hologram. You can walk around that apple and examine it from three dimensions, and that's recorded on a two-dimensional surface. And the idea of the holographic principle is that that's what a black hole event horizon is. What's inside the black hole is a projection of the information stored at the event horizon, and that's true for every point in space. It's projected from the cosmic event horizon relative to that point in space.
So what's the implication of that? You're saying that basically that at the event horizon there is, it can be holographically projected, but does that mean that it's not actually there? It's not actually inside? Or when you say that the universe...
It's not fundamental.
It's not fundamental.
Which is not to say that it doesn't exist, but it's experienced. It's emergent from information recorded in two dimensions, not in three dimensions. So I guess I'm going way off.
But are you saying that that two-dimensional thing is what's really there, and then that the three dimensions is actually just a projection, a hologram, like a hologram?
Well, like, what do you mean by just and really? And,
yeah.
That's where things get weird, because it's what physicists are trying to figure out when they're extrapolating the holographic principle is that whether or not the third dimension is fundamental. Real would be like, they're not, physicists don't.
Right. So they're saying it's not fundamental.
Real. They're saying that it's emergent.
Emergent.
Right. So the universe actually is a two-dimensional object, like two-dimensional film.
Yeah.
Of information.
Okay.
That's.
This
is bordering on metaphor, obviously. Talking about
sure.
The fourth dimension, we're talking in three-dimensional language.
Yeah, I had a Buddhist monk who was quite a thinker, who had done some investigation into quantum physics, say that there's some kind of a theory that all the particles in the universe, all whatever exists, is actually just one particle.
The
moving.
The single electron hypothesis.
Yeah.
It works in principle, but I came up with the same idea on my own with that, because the universe started in every possible way. it's funny that I took the indiscernibility of particles for granted, that one particle is indiscernible from another particle in its inherent properties. I took that for granted, and what I extrapolated from just reading about some of their histories and a cosmic singularity was that all you would need is one particle in every possible path, and you would get all the particles that make up the universe. I watched a video on that, and there's I can't remember exactly what it is, but it doesn't pan out in a way that if I have to invent how I understood how I was wrong about that, is not so much that I was wrong, but the way that he's probably the Buddhist and myself were making sense of that is not in the same kind of sense that we talk about particles. So like, is it a single electron? Is it a single Higgs particle?
The way you said it
Right.
made sense. If it's one single particle of some kind that's in every position possible, then you have the universe.
Yeah, it's not workable in the frame of talking about particles, though.
Yeah. No.
So I think it's workable in like string theoretical sense.
Okay.
But you couldn't take a particle and have that particle stand in for all the different particles on different quantum fields.
Yeah.
Because remember, there's no such thing as a particle, right? They're all quantum fields. String theory comes closer to that idea in that all the different quantum fields are and particles in those fields are vibrations of strings and more contemporary membranes, two-dimensional objects, right? Strings are one-dimensional. A particle in string theory is a string that vibrates in a certain pattern for one particle and a different pattern for another particle. Some of them are looped around, and then they got membranes that are more like a sheet rather than strings. In that sense, you can say there's one thing in all possible positions that create all the different particles, but you couldn't have one particle in different positions in a position such that this one particle is an electron over here and a Higgs particle over here, right? But in string theoretical terms, that's basically the idea, is that it's all vibrations of unidimensional objects. So there actually isn't what we see as being different quantum fields are actually a singular object in different vibrations, and the vibrations we experience as different fields. So in that sense, you could have that idea. But as particles, again, this is the confusion created by continuing to use particle language when we're actually talking about excitations in a field, right? So the thing that I took for granted, that he probably takes for granted or learned, is that an excitation in a field, so like electromagnetic excitation, a photon of energy, that number at that point in space is numerically identical to that a photon over here. There's no property of one that isn't also true of the other. The only way in which you could say they're different photons is that one is over here and one is over there, right? So in a very real sense, there's only one photon, right? But that only sounds profound when you forget that there's actually no such thing as a photon. There's just the singular field, right? So for every field that's the case, the electron field, you could say there's one electron in all of these different positions all at once. And the only way we know one electron from the other is not that we know that this electron's here and this electron's here. We know that electron is here and electron is there. The idea of them being discrete, discernible objects is a fiction. That's why we look at it in terms of fields instead of particles, right? If you have a field and you have excitations of that field, you have one object, the field, with numbers, just information. This is a profound idea that I think more physics students need to be introduced to early, is that imagine you're on a boat in the middle of a perfectly still pond, and you throw a rock into the ocean, and those concentric waves are moving towards you. That's not the water moving towards you. That's the form of the water moving towards you.
Yeah.
That form is an abstraction.
Yeah, if you put a ball on that water, it's going to go directly up and then down. It's the water isn't moving towards you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we understand waves as moving through a medium.
Yeah.
But a wave moving through a quantum field isn't moving through a medium. It's purely the form. It's just the excitation.
Yeah.
That's why I call them excitation. It's kind of a weird word for it. But if you had to settle the particle wave duality, they're waves, they're not particles, right? The particle is just what we call a crust of a wave in a field, right?
Yeah.
But that wave is not a wave of some substance. It's a number moving towards you. It's an abstract object. The universe is a mathematical object. And what came to me in one moment when I was 15, and I remember it very distinctly, lying on my bed listening to the audiobook of A Brief History of Time for the thousandth time. That's a way overstatement, but a lot. Enough to the point that the audio cassette was starting to lose its fidelity. It occurred to me that from the frame of reference of an omniscience, all information would cancel itself out, all experience. So there's simpler ways of putting it. If in order to experience time, there must be events you haven't experienced yet. There must be knowledge that you haven't received yet. An omniscience cannot have a next moment, right? Because in the next moment, that omniscience would know a moment that it didn't know previously. An omniscience can't increase in its knowledge, right? So if you think of like all the universes, all possible universes superimposed, you get this energy silence. In that energy silence, there would just be pure light. the way I understand, and that light is just information, right? Everything canceled out to zero. The way that I came to understand God, there's many different ways that I came to this, but the main idea was that an omniscience is a purely still moment of consciousness, an absolute fullness and absolute absence. Just like standing in the center of those booming speakers, there's a full volume of these speakers that is creating a silence, right? Because you have the inverse waveforms canceling out. The reference frame of the consciousness of an omniscience would be pure silence, pure information silence, and away from that equilibrium. In a very analogous sense to the way that virtual particles become real particles when they because when they pop out of existence, they're moving away from the equilibrium that they were in not existing, like not even being imaginary. They pop into existence away from the equilibrium, and then they annihilate, going back to the equilibrium. A conscious being is like a little pocket of information away from that equilibrium, where it can't cancel out with the negation of itself. It's really
because I'm trying to figure out why the whatever is at the center of it would be omniscient. Like you said that an omniscience would have no experiences left to experience. It would have experienced everything. But why would an omniscience, sort of like an all-knowing consciousness, be at the center?
There should be another word for it, but omniscience captures it. And I mean, you could just say that omniscience is impossible, logically impossible, because with an absolute fullness of information, you have an absolute absence of information. What's profound about that point you reach when you look in the direction of omniscience, increasing information, you get to the point that we would call omniscience. There is a thing there that to me fills the space of God, that neither exists nor fails to exist. It is necessarily existing. It is the one singular metaphysical object, and I say object as in just subject of statements, that you can talk about, that neither fails to exist nor exists. It is, in a sense, infinite pure potential. I'm starting to sound like Deepak Chopra. And that stillness, like the religious experience of that stillness, is what meditation is.
Right.
It's the space, the source of all things. And
do you think that
I started this with quantum immortality.
Right.
I think I might be prepared to go there, because I can wrap
just
this
one
back
question.
around to,
do you think that that things are deterministic? Do you think that
it's logically impossible to be otherwise, in my opinion.
So it is deterministic. Then why is it infinite potential? Why isn't it just a point in the middle of a bunch of determined processes?
Well, because every single possible one from that reference frame exists.
Okay.
Right? It's determined simply by the laws of logic.
Right.
Right? I'm a determinist. If all logically possible worlds exist, then it is determined that every possible event in every possible world must, in fact, take place relative to that world, right? Within a world, the how can I sum this up? There's two different ways of talking about determinism. For me, they're one. I'm trying to find a way of talking about it as a singular concept because that's what I like to do because they are a singular concept. But there's the free will argument against determinism, and then there's our physical events determined. In the I'll get to the metaphysical part, but the free will angle on it, I think, is far simpler than debates about it make it out to be. Sam Harris, in his short little book on free will, make of it whatever you want, I think, and he gets this from Buddhism, and I think it's the simplest and strongest argument. You are not the author of your own thoughts. You are not the author of your experiences. They happen to you. And we know from neuroscience that we actually witness our own decisions after the fact.
Yeah.
Right? So I think the question of whether things are determined is kind of moot. Like, determined according to whom, from what reference frame? This is going to sound somewhat unrelated, but even God, if any of the conceptions of an almighty God were logically possible, even that God could not author its own thoughts. That God could not decide ahead of time what thought to have next, because there would be an infinite regress.
Right.
This is a thing that I like to bring up with people who believe in creator beings is, of all the logically possible gods, how do we end up with this one? It seems infinitely arbitrary or ad hoc that we just so happen to be lucky enough for the one God that exists to be the one that wants the world to exist exactly the way that it does, right? It could have logically been some other way. It could have logically been a God that desired things to be slightly different. So you have a 1 in infinite chance of getting the right God to get the right world to be finely tuned to get you. You can always push fine-tuning arguments back to God, and the God that I'm talking about doesn't have that problem, because it doesn't experience time in a linear fashion. It doesn't experience events one after the other. The only way for consciousness to exist is for it to expand in its knowledge. It has to consume events, right? And omniscience is a fullness of all those events. So to go back to your fine-tuning question, of all logically possible worlds, the actual world is the world at which there's the perfect equilibrium. All physical reality cancels out. But away from that equilibrium is the qualia of our experience. And that qualia can't cancel itself out. A virtual particle can't cancel itself out, right? And virtual particles neither exist nor fail to exist. Because they're moving forward and backwards in time. In a sense, it is actually itself annihilating with itself. But from the reference frame of that particle, that virtual particle, that from our reference frame is imaginary, it's not real, didn't exist for any duration. From its perspective, it did, right? From your perspective on this side away from that equilibrium, your experiences exist. But in a like a metaphysically ultimate sense, none of it does. The only thing that's left when everything cancels out is the qualia, the experience. So in one way to put it is there's one observer that observes experiences, all logically possible experiences. And the only experienceable experiences are finite ones. There's no experience of being omniscient because that's done as fast as it starts, right? It has already annihilated itself. Maybe if I this will become, all of this is stuff you have to sit on. I'll jump to the quantum immortality thing, and to flush it out in your mind. That way I can wrap it back to my original comment about how I've come around to the idea of the cessation of consciousness. Quantum immortality is this idea that for every quantum state, so there's the quantum suicide experiment. This is something that philosophers of science, philosophers of physics, and physicists, theoretical physicists who dare to contemplate. If you had some, like we'll say machine gun, or some kind of, if you could set up a gun to shoot a bullet through your head and definitely kill you, but the trigger would only go off with the decay of a unstable atom. This is a variation on Schrodinger's cat, right? Inside the box, there's a cat. Depending on whether or not some particle decays, when that particle decays, it releases gas and kills the cat. Well, if you set up the experiment so that you're the cat, from your frame of reference, it should be impossible for that gun. All possible quantum states of the world, from your perspective, should include some variation other than that gun properly going off. From your perspective, that particle will either never decay, which it will eventually have to, or the gun will malfunction, or an earthquake will happen, or all possible ways that experiment could be disrupted have to happen before the one that ends in you as Schrodinger's cat dying. And it leads to kind of frightening implications that this ride will never end. There will always be some quantum state of the probability cloud that is the what is it called, the waveform of the universe. There's always some variation at which you didn't die, right? So if you take it for granted that particles exist in along every history, not just a singular one, which is what the math tells us, then that should be true at a macro state in the same way it's true at a quantum level, which means in the probability cloud of the whole universe, there will be one slightly different such that you survived it, and another one where I watch you get shot. But there will never be one where you watch you get shot, right? So there's this almost Darwinian-like filtering of quantum events that filters out all the ones that end in your death. So this was one of my very early extrapolations just from A Brief History of Time, was quantum immortality. I came up with it on my own. I don't care if people believe me about that. But I very distinctly remember trying to explain this to people.
They didn't get it, did they?
Yeah. If you think I'm articulate right now, which I don't, I certainly wasn't then. But I've been thinking about it a lot. And I think there's kind of something analogous to heat death of the universe that's also true of your consciousness. That this is another thing that I'll bring up with Christians who believe in hell. Imagine eternal suffering. Let's just, to make it simple, just hellfire. If you survive one moment of hellfire, you've survived them all. The idea that you're going to be in eternal torment is to say that you're going to survive hell, right? It may not end, but those moments at a wide enough scale, looking at it, will become indistinguishable from each other. There's only so many ways that you can be tormented, and those, you repeat that an infinite number of times. It doesn't let's say there's X many ways, like states you could be in while you're suffering in hell, and that repeats an infinite number of times. That doesn't increase the amount of suffering. You're only going to suffer that once. You would be incapable of discerning one experience of that set of moments of suffering from the next iteration, right? There is actually a bandwidth of suffering that you're capable of, and you reach that limit, and that's it, right? An infinite amount of time of that doesn't increase the suffering. And in the same way, because I used to think about the idea of quantum immortality. You're going to exist for an infinite amount of time? I don't think so, actually. First of all, we're talking in terms of a self, which doesn't exist in the first place. But in the same sense that the 5-year-old you is outside your time horizon, right? That's a fiction, right? You're very much a different person, right?
This is one of the things that you mean by that there's no self. It's not just that the mind is modular and we're sort of distinct.
Yeah. There's many
personalities
different ways
at different times.
We have the idea of self wrong.
But there's also the fact that whatever existed when we were 5 at that point in the past doesn't exist now. There's something different here.
Yeah. And what I'm saying about increasing the length of an individual, the continuity of consciousness, which also isn't a thing, you increase the length. It doesn't increase the width. There's a bandwidth of consciousness. There's a limit of experiencing events at which consciousness makes sense.
Yeah.
Right? For there to be a consciousness. So like the illusion of it being a single history of a being, there's a bandwidth to it. And it's a really terrifying thought. This really became real to me when I was playing around with salvia at really high doses. You like go down, and this is a really fascinating thing. We're gonna have to.
I didn't do a very high dose. I just laid there with my eyes closed and had sort of like a just black and white like lines. I don't know quite how to describe it, but just sort of moving. It was like a linear visual experience.
Do 60 times or plus.
I did a lot of DMT.
Yeah. So here's a really interesting thing about those two drugs.
Yeah.
With DMT, your degrees of freedom increase. Did you have that experience? Like there were directions that didn't exist, that exist in DMT consciousness that don't exist in normal consciousness.
I was going to say, it seems like your field of vision is bigger. Like you got no body. You don't quite
there's more directions.
Yeah.
Right? Degrees of freedom are like directions.
Yeah. It just seems like a massive field of visual space.
Yeah. With DMT, you break through on DMT, you go down, and I have been the two-dimensional surface of a wall in a gymnasium, of a countertop at a cafe.
Okay.
Of the first time I did it, I had no idea what I was getting into.
Yeah.
I went down these stairs as I was going into it.
Yeah.
But it peaked with me becoming the two-dimensional surface of a piece of red plastic that broke off of a Fields department store in the parking lot.
So wait, do you think that was a real like point in space in the world? Or was that
it was a real
hallucination?
This is the thing. What anybody who's done psychedelics is calling a hallucination is not what you're experiencing when you do DMT.
No, DMT, no. And that's what I said to.
It is a whole nother thing.
Right. So I had this one experience. I've never actually. You're talking about a piece of plastic in a Fields parking lot. I've never actually on DMT broken through to something that seemed like
that was salvia.
Okay.
DMT, the degrees of freedom increase. So you go from 3 dimensions to more.
Oh, right.
Where at salvia, I went to 2 dimensions to 1 to complete timelessness. And that moment, as you're going in and out of becoming an inanimate object, is terrifying.
Interesting.
Because time slows to a halt.
Okay.
It's like going inside a black hole. It really is.
Yeah.
Because time slows to a halt. When time has stopped, there's no experience, but going in and coming out of it is endless, and you're so far away from what human consciousness is, like that full range, the bandwidth that makes up human consciousness through our 5 senses and stuff. You're so far away from that. I'll speak as I'm so far away from that the thought I'm having is, oh my God, am I really an inanimate object? And like there's a very real sense in which, like, I know that there's something much better than being an inanimate object, but I have no idea what it is. And I'm losing my capacity to experience next moments.
I totally understand what you're saying.
It's like this is
about
an infinite experience of whatever that better thing was.
About DMT being increasing the degrees of freedom, because that's what it is. And then it's like sucking your consciousness back down into human form, right? Like,
yeah, the reason why you can't bring it back with you is because you only have 3 degrees of freedom in the way that you model the world when you're not on DMT. Yeah. When you're on DMT, you're modeling the world in more than 3 degrees of freedom.
In the same way, you forget who you are. You forget who your limited self is. But I just be like, one time I did I guess, a large dose. And I just became this landscape, this Salvador Dali like strangeness landscape of melting and folding and it's just immense color and shape, and it feels like real, but it's more real than real.
Yeah, it's primary experience. It's pure qualia.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's what I mean by there being a bandwidth. So DMT can increase that bandwidth so that you have increased degrees of freedom.
Yeah.
But I think that there's a limit at which it's no longer the idea of next moments in some continuity of consciousness of a single being. It sort of becomes untenable.
Yeah.
Right. The events, the bandwidth gets so big that the events that the consciousness is consuming, witnessing, are simultaneous rather than sequential. Right. You increase it enough this way, the time dimension becomes less meaningful.
Yeah, because then you have to remember who you are. Like I remembered who I was. I remembered what substance I ingested, the people that I got the stuff with, and it all comes back to me, the world, the place that I am.
So if this ride never ended, it would be like the universe expanding to heat death. There would be a point at which it would make no sense in any way of talking about it to call that you, right? The continuity between you at this point in time to you a trillion years from now wouldn't make sense in that being a single object. And that's to really sum it up. But I think like the virtual particles popping in and out of existence, consciousness are like little pockets of information that expand. They don't pop, but they fizzle out in the same way the universe will, right? They have their own horizon, consciousness horizon. And what God is conscious, the full end horizon, right? That includes everything.
Yeah.
Right. So
I described part of DMT experience to Eckham, and he said, "So if you can believe that bullshit, why don't you believe in God?"
Well, I do believe in God.
You do, but that's what he asked me, and
I would love to sit down and go over all the inconsistencies when it comes to trying to put personhood into the picture of God.
He'll claim it's not personal, but then he uses the pronoun he and describes him as somebody who can, literally perform miracles and save your life, and it's a very personal God.
Yeah, there's some serious equivocating going on there.
Yeah,
that's for sure. That's what I would want to make clear to him, is that you've got God that he and I share. The Sikh God is pretty much pointing the same direction as I am. Yeah. And then you have the fictions, right? Yeah. Just like Buddhism, the original teachings of the Buddha were never written down. And the Buddhism sort of developed into closer to sort of, it was influenced by Hindu mythology and stuff, and fictions were added to it. And that's the same thing that happened with Sikhism. I don't actually believe that's that Western religions took that path. I think some Indian and Chinese philosophies came from like a parsimonious God to a complicated God with all sorts of ad hoc properties, and then Western gods were more started out ad hoc, personified objects. And today, to keep up with science and philosophy, they've gone the other direction.
Yeah, I think like the Old Testament God was very much a man in the sky.
Yeah, yeah, who makes bets with the devil. And, just about to bring something else up.
We didn't get to reincarnation yet.
We didn't get to reincarnation. Well, it's easier to deal with having, if any of what we've said so far was understandable. The idea that I like to make a joke that I pity the poor fool who had the misfortune of inheriting Hitler's soul, because that person has to suffer the karma of Hitler. They're not Hitler. They're not Hitler. They just have the same soul. The poor schmuck got really unlucky with the soul that it got, right? Because the soul is not Hitler, right? You are not your thoughts. You're not your body. You're not your history. You're none of those things, right? And you don't... so reincarnation is, again, it's equivocating with the concept of the self, because they want to say that that you can't have it both ways. You can't be your thoughts, your memories, your history, and not be those at the same time. What properties does a soul have, right? There's the samskaras. Well,
yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So let me just tell you the way I understood it when I was in the Buddhist community, okay? So you have the sankaras or samskaras, depending on the language, and they're affected by clinging, right? And actually the reason why they come together and we exist as a conscious being is ignorance. And it's actually ignorance causes that clinging, and then the goal is to let go and become detached. Detach what, right? Because apparently you're not your consciousness, you're not your thoughts, you're not your feelings.
How
you're
are
not all
you your
this.
samskaras?
You're not
those,
them.
right?
Well, that's the point. And not self is a teaching in Buddhism, but what exists though is a clinging to them and a belief that they're a self, and it's that clinging that continues through time, and it's an ignorance. So it's through ignorance that the clinging to the sankharas exists, and then it's through the enlightenment or the end of the ignorance that the letting go and the liberation occurs.
Yeah. Well, from my view, the ignorance is believing that the samskaras exist in the first place. Do samskaras have content, right? Do you have is you wronging one person, person Y, in exactly this way, and then another person who exists? So you wrong one person in a very discrete, specific way. I wrong another person in the same discrete way. Does the details of the color of that person's hair, the time in the point in space and the time, the moment in time, is that part of the samskara? Do I pay...
You mean in terms of karma, in terms of the results?
Yeah. Do I pay for that differently than you do?
The way I understood it
yours
is the
had
only
blue eyes
the
and
only
happened over there.
The way I understood is that the only factors that are relevant to the results of your actions in terms of whether the way that you wrong someone or help them do something nice is the quality of their own moral character. Okay. So if they're a moral being and you wrong them, then you have a worse consequence than if you wrong a person of bad character, immoral.
So in our hypothetical, I wrong a person of this moral character,
Yeah.
you do the same to the person of the identical moral character. This
Right.
is a purely hypothetical.
Then we would have the same
Okay.
result.
So, is it possible in principle
Yeah.
that two souls have exactly the same samskaras? It should be.
Sure.
Are they exactly the same soul?
Well, no, because they would be different. They're
How?
different awareness. So because they're two different beings, right? Like if they
Well,
have
now
this
you're
same.
saying that something more than samskaras is traveling with you.
Oh no, we're talking about at the same time. These two people who have identical bodies,
Well,
basically. Identical
I'm,
minds.
I'm making the hypothetical
Yeah.
to contradict the part that makes reincarnation make sense in this idea that since two souls are existing at the same time, that they can't be identical souls. They're two individual souls, right?
If there were two identical universes, I mean, I don't quite understand
the details
argument.
of the if the details of the universe mattered, then that would be part of what comes with you, is the fact that that person had blue eyes and this one had. So imagine two parallel worlds.
Yeah.
Right. One in which you wrong a person in a particular moral character, and the other one, everything is exactly the same except for that person has brown eyes.
Yeah.
Right? Does the fact of the brown eyes and blue eyes change the samskara, change the soul?
Oh no, my understanding is no. Like the only thing, because
So
it's about feeling, right? And it's about generally
The feelings were
both
the same.
Physical.
Everything
No.
was
But
exactly the same.
I'm talking about results, right? So the way I understood it is that it's fairly universal in the way that the results occur, dependent on one thing, and that's just the moral character, the amount of suffering you cause as well, and then so. It'll be like a law of physics. Like if you drop something this size into a water, you'll get a splash this big.
Yeah.
It's the same feeling result. So you get the same amount of pain, depending on the moral character and the amount of suffering caused.
Yeah. So if you take out the details, the content,
Yeah.
things like what color were their eyes,
Yeah, not
and
important.
where a subatomic particle was on the other side of the galaxy, if you take out all those details,
Yeah.
then there are only so many possible samskaras for a human being. And
Well, some sankharas are like, just imagine that as bodies. That's all that really means, bodies, and I guess minds as well, in types of.
well, this is what I'm saying.
personalities.
This is what I'm saying. There's only so many of those.
Right, there is.
Right? And two of those can exist at the same time,
Sure.
identical to each other.
It could.
Right?
Yeah.
What reincarnation is presuming is this idea of there being this collection of properties that has this continuity through people, right?
Collection of properties, continuity through people.
The collection of properties
Yeah.
that are the samskars, the content-free part, right? What traveled with you wasn't the information about the color of their eyes.
No.
What traveled with you was the samskaras, right? There's
Well, let's go through them. So I use the word sankharas. It's Pali,
Yeah.
and that's what
Let-
Theravada Buddhism. Let me just come on.
Before we do that,
Because there's a certain number of them. There's a few of them that are physical, that are literally mean the body. So they don't go with you. Certain sankharas, like the physical form, they don't go with you. And also feelings are fleeting. Like it's not like feelings come with you. Feelings come and go rapidly, right?
Yeah.
Thoughts are the same. They come and go rapidly. It's not like your thoughts go with you
So
after the
what
death of
does
the
go with
body.
you?
Right. What does go with you, right? And even consciousness. See, they make the point that none of this stuff endures for more than a fraction of a second, right? They're all fleeting. Consciousness is a present moment process, but it's what is it that continues, like from one life to another? It's not any of those things. So it's not even the consciousness. It's not even there's no thing there. There's even when you're talking about the personality habits or the patterns of personality. That's not a thing. But what there is there, like they call them the 5 aggregates or sankharas, and they're affected by clinging. Affected by clinging. So
and there's only so many ways for some point of clinging to cling on to things in this world.
So you're saying that once the body dies, why
is it sequential?
exactly? Well, why would there be another?
Why does it go from the death of one person to the birth of another person? You could rearrange it.
Well, because here's the thing. One of
there's nothing left to make it such that you couldn't be the reincarnation of me.
Right.
And the samskaras
Nothing left.
that carried on with my birth are the ones that you have when you die.
Right.
And so your death is the moment prior to my birth.
So one of the problems with it, I think, is that there's a duality. There's a duality concept. The idea that consciousness is separate from material. Right?
Yeah, well, I'm taking that for granted. I'm not even going there. I'm just saying there's...
Well, then it's the consciousness. It's the conscious, like a conscious individual clings to its own existence. I want to continue to exist, right?
Yeah.
And then so when the other aggregates, when the other elements of me, the body dies, then the consciousness, which is separate in the Buddhist conception, is separate from material, but relies on material. Like I don't know if this metaphor makes any sense, but it's one that they use, and it's like how the relationship between matter and consciousness, the way they describe it is it's like the way that a piece of grass has a sheath. And then the grass grows through the center of the sheath and then comes up into the wind. And when the wind blows the grass bends the sheath. And so it's like the grass is consciousness and the sheath is the matter.
Yeah. From my metaphysics, that's talking about the difference between the substance and the form. And I'm saying there's no substance, there's only form.
Yeah.
Right? The lining up people's lives, histories, what all you're doing, it's arbitrary in lining them up from death to birth, right? Some scars that one person dies with is the same set of some scars that an infinite number of possible people are born with.
Yeah.
Right. So of all the people who died with the samskaras that you inherited when you were born, each one of those has an equal claim to being your past life.
But what if it's like this though? Because
unless you want to say that something else survived that distinguishes which one of those infinite number of past beings.
So let's say that it's simply that consciousness. Let's say Buddhists are right in their dualistic thinking about consciousness and matter. And so the conscious experience that we're having right now is simply a conscious experience that continues. It's an individual conscious experience. You don't have my conscious experience. I don't have yours. So
but you don't have that of your past life either.
Right, because you forget. But let's just say that memory, it's quite in the way that when you do a bunch of DMT and then you literally forget your life and you all in a moment remember all the details of your life.
Yeah.
Well, but were you there? Like, is it still you having the DMT experience?
No, because there was no you in the first place.
Sure, but there is consciousness. There is consciousness, and then it's an individuated consciousness. It's my experience of consciousness. So the Buddhist idea is that the consciousness, the continuous stream of consciousness, which you said earlier doesn't exist, and you can elaborate on that. But so is that consciousness that is, my experience of consciousness continues after the body dies and has a new form and feeling. And
what if there's only one?
Yeah, I'm completely open to that. In fact, that's what I think is quite logical.
And that would be just simply us arbitrarily lining up lives such that each one with some set of some scars at the end of one, we're just lining it up with arbitrarily with some other one that starts off with the same some scars.
Yeah, I
right?
don't quite get
It's
that argument, because like
Well, what
I'm not saying that I
is
believe in
that
reincarnation.
it's just an ad hoc indexing
Well, okay.
scheme.
Think of
that-
it this way, though. Think of it this way. So you, despite the fact that you don't have memory after the body passes away, because imagine memory is stored in the brain, but the stream of consciousness continues, and that doesn't make sense to you.
I don't understand how that makes sense to you.
Because you can. What about a person that gets amnesia, so that they can't remember anything that happened before, say, an accident?
Yeah.
Trauma to the brain.
The only thing that travels with them into that next moment is not their self, it's their body, and the things that all the patterns of behavior and stuff.
Precisely.
Yeah.
So that's what Buddhism says is occurring.
And all those habits, all the things that formulate the kind of character that comes out of that same body with the person who's now woken up without his memories. That person who has no access to the life of themselves prior, that person prior to their amnesia is dead.
You're talking about the time after death, or no, the time after amnesia, because that's not true. They can still play the piano. They just have no recollection of learning it.
Yeah, no, those are some scars. Those are because
right, so
the
that's what I'm
body's
saying.
Still there.
But yeah, exactly, and maybe piano skills would be lost too.
Yeah, and so would
everything. Are you sure?
Yes.
Are you positive?
Yes.
What about the fact that a certain stream of consciousness did experience all those things, did learn to play the piano to a level of mastery? Is it not possible that even if that consciousness appeared in a new body, that it might not somehow, as it grows up, be inclined to learn piano again? Might be attracted to pianos
because the body was built around.
No, it's a new body. Like I'm talking about somebody dies and gets reincarnated. If that occurs,
if you were to go through a replicator and replicate yourself so that you have the identical body, roughly speaking, the same would be true.
No, not the identical body. It has nothing to do with that. Imagine they're
No, I'm making a hypothetical to make my point. Yeah. What I'm saying is, if you used a replicator and replicated that the piano player, both of them would have the skills to play piano. Both of them would be inclined to play piano. Both of them would carry on as if they were the same soul, but they're not, right? Or are they?
No. This is what I'm saying.
I'm saying is it doesn't make sense to talk about those as being two souls, because all the samskaras you can, in principle, replicate, and now you've doubled the number of souls. How do you end up? Would one of those two replicas be a P zombie? The lights aren't on inside because they don't have a soul?
Because they're the same?
Because their bodies are identical.
So, but what is that? All that
their
means?
Memories, their muscle memory, their physical form is the same. So their inclinations are the same. The memories they have are the same.
But they're two different individual conscious beings.
Yes. So would there be two souls?
According to Buddhism, yes. According to Buddhism, they would be when each of them died.
So
let's say we have
replicate souls.
Let's say we have two identical universes, because it's two identical people having two identical experiences, and they both die at the same time. The Buddhist conception of that.
Yeah, but I'm not talking about different worlds. I'm talking about replicating the physical body.
They would be different though, because the body is designed by the environment in many ways. New soul
which one of them had the past life? So let's
all
say
of them. So okay, here's the Buddhist conception. Let me just explain to you.
You have person X reincarnated to person Y. Person Y is duplicated.
There's no duplication. No duplication in the Buddhist conception. Let me explain to you what Buddhists say.
But let me finish what I'm saying, just so that I can feel sure that you're replying to it. Would person Z be able to say that person X was their past life in the same way that person Y could?
You just talked about someone was duplicated?
with a replicator, right?
With a replicator. Well, here's the way Buddhists see it. Okay, it would be a different being with a different soul, a different different past lives.
How would they have different past lives?
Let me explain. Okay,
Sorry.
because according to the Buddhist conception of reincarnation, each individual being, now this makes no sense, but each individual being has an infinite string of past lives. Yeah. And so there is no new beings. There are no new beings. If you create a body, the only thing that could ever animate that is the entrance of a consciousness, a stream of consciousness which has existed back into beginningless time.
Yeah, and what I'm saying is all logically possible experiences exist, and there's one God. There's God that has had every logically possible experience, and consciousness is just a string of those put together, right? And what makes a person the abstraction of a person, so like the experiencer, there's this modeling going on that's modeling the world as if there's a single experiencer of the world, right? That's an illusion. But for that illusion to even exist, for there to be the illusion of a person, I've lost my thought. The self is the illusion of the person. The illusion doesn't continue when the thing creating the illusion doesn't. The thing creating the illusion is the physical body creating this modeling process that makes it seem like you're a single being in a single space at this point in time, and then you're at a next point in time. That illusion ends when the thing creating the illusion
the body
ends. Yeah,
that makes sense to me. That just makes sense to me. I don't think
if you take the linearity out of reincarnation, you just have one observer behind all logically possible experiences.
Sure. Yeah, that's all plausible. I
think it goes beyond plausibility. I think that's just a priori true.
Well, then you've got yourself a religion.
In a sense, it's not a very exciting one.
No.
Because
the idea
it's certainly not to the ego. That's the problem.
Exactly.
Religions are built around the wants and desires and attachments of egos. Right. And the real metaphysical truth is not hard to grasp, but the ego refuses to accept the idea that it is an illusion. Have
you heard of Ernest Becker, The Denial of Death? He's a psychologist he was at Simon Fraser University, actually.
What was it called?
The Denial of Death. It's a very famous book from 76 or something like that.
I recognize the name, but just...
He was a psychoanalyst, sort of Freudian, and he was updating Freud's ideas. And he was saying that religion is... he had this term, Immortality Project. Yeah. So it's we don't want to die. We don't want to cease to exist, so we create religions that allow us to be immortal. And so many of the things that people do in their life are immortality projects.
Yeah, we're dying in every moment.
Yeah.
In every moment, there's a moment that's beyond the horizon of all memory.
Yeah.
There's the infinitesimally small amount of information that you experienced a week ago is still there.
Yeah.
Right. That can in any way recreate the model of the world that you had at a moment 2 weeks ago. Right. You can vaguely piece things together to create a projection. This is just like that holographic film. If you cut a piece of holographic film in half and project through that half, you get the same image. You keep cutting it. You can get it really small. The whole apple is there, but the fidelity of it decreases.
Now, what about people with perfect recall?
I don't.
They're freaks, eh?
I don't know. I don't know how to understand that,
Me neither.
and I don't think that. I don't think we have a language to properly communicate with them
No,
and them us.
they don't understand it
to-
themselves.
Well, I don't know how it's because they're I do not believe that they have perfect recall. I believe that they're able to recreate objects with really good fidelity.
Interesting.
Right? So they can remember a page or something.
Yeah.
But they're not going to remember the placement of every object in the room, right? To have perfect memory would literally to be able to have
Photographic, to re-experience, to go back there and see things they didn't
moments at the same time.
they didn't
You can't.
cognize at the first.
Yeah, I think it's logically impossible.
It's just they only remember what they were consciously aware of at the time, which
Yeah.
is still amazing. That's incredible.
It is incredible. I think there's. I obviously don't know. I'm no expert, but there's got to be degrees of that, and there's got to be a point at which that becomes a handicap,
Absolutely.
right? Because your own memories are going to intrude upon your experience constantly.
Yeah.
Right? It would be schizophrenic if you couldn't tell the difference between a memory and a real object in front of you. You sit down at the same table you did for the last 2 weeks and you see the apple you had right here that was there 2 weeks ago.
Right. I see what you're saying.
You're going to
Yeah.
be living in a schizophrenic world.
Yeah.
Right? I really don't think... I know that I don't understand it.
No.
And I'm certain that that's because it's not properly understood and especially not properly communicated what that phenomena is.
No, I've actually seen an interview with that. I don't know if he's a mathematics professor who can tell you what he had for lunch, in 1967 on a certain date.
Yeah. What is the phenomenology? Like what is happening in his conscious experience? It's logically impossible for you to know because you'd have to be him, and you can't be yourself and them at the same time. It's probably something along the lines of another degree of freedom, in that that apple's not being placed in the three-dimensional space that it originally was, that they have a way of like modeling a higher level of abstraction over top of the model of the world that they're in, right? So they can place the apple there, but in a way that we can't understand it. The way that we would understand it is, well, if I did that, then there would be an apple there in exactly the same way as there was in the 3 dimensions that I modeled at the time. But it's probably something along the lines of there's a level of abstraction at which they can like not map into, but map over their current experience, right? So they can sort of hold modeled objects in their consciousness in a way
like a file drawer or something with
not really a file drawer. They're just exciting the same neurons that were active at the time. But I think it's probably a whole category of. There's probably a whole set of different ways of having photographic memories that we're quantifying over when we talk about photographic
Is it
memory.
the same thing
I
to
really
be
don't.
able to recall, or to be able to, off the top of your head, say what the date was in 1922, January 2nd?
Yes, because they're mathematical objects,
Okay.
right? They're information structures stored in the brain. And the thing is with figuring out a date is different because you can extrapolate a date.
Yeah.
But like the weather.
Or what day of the week it was, I mean.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that would be different than somebody like a savant who could tell you exactly what the weather was.
Right.
But only the weather.
That he remembers. Yeah. Or the ones that can fly over a city and draw the entire skyline that they flew over.
Yeah.
That's photographic memory, I'm guessing.
Yeah, it's probably similar to like synesthesia. You know, people who can see odors.
Yeah.
Right. So I've read of reports of synesthetes who they have very clear pictures of like crystal forms and stuff of different smells or tastes, and they're mapped over their visual system. So it's and we can't really know what that's like because you have to have the experience to know it. But it's like an added degree of freedom. So it's a thing, but I just don't think it's possible for us to understand what they're talking about when they talk about it. I wish I could recreate pages from books that I've read. But I have a feeling that it would lack some creativity. You know what I mean? Like, why aren't these people giants dominating the world? Why aren't they like godlike? Well, because it doesn't actually amount to a lot to be able to remember things perfectly. You know, your brain transforms information. There's a reason why your memory is fallible, mostly because it's inefficient to keep information, extraneous information. Our brains adapted to prioritize information.
Present moment information.
No, relevant
present
information.
Environment.
Right?
Well, relevant is mainly close to the present. Recent past is valuable for knowing what to do in the future.
Yeah, like remembering how you developed a phobia is less important than remembering that snake is terrifying.
Yeah.
You know. But what do I think of it? Well, I don't know how to think about it.
No. So just to be clear, though, you don't think reincarnation happens?
No, I think it's.
Basically,
they're equivocating on the self. I honestly don't understand how, and I find it hard to believe that the Buddha believed in reincarnation.
Right. Well, yeah.
And they say that he said not to write down what he said. So those who did weren't exactly his.
I don't think, not according to the Pali Canon, which is the oldest record.
Well, of course,
I'm quite actually familiar.
Of course, that's what those who wrote it down.
Well, who would have said it? There's no. It didn't come down in any other way, so he didn't say, as far as we know, he didn't say don't write it down. He just it was an oral culture. It was a culture in which stories were transmitted orally, and then they only wrote it down during Muslim invasions a few hundred years.
He didn't invent reincarnation, right? The people that he preached to, if you want to call it that, believed in reincarnation.
Well, it may be.
They all took it for granted, and
It may be the case that he took it for granted.
It could be. But I find it difficult to believe that
someone of his wisdom.
No, that somebody who had thought along these lines could not have extrapolated himself out of
reincarnation belief,
of the idea that of continuity of consciousness.
Right.
It's equally believable that he did buy into it, and what he was trying to do was explain how reincarnation
It's also equally believable that he thought that that reincarnation was a useful concept and karma was a useful concept to describe conducting yourself in the world.
Yeah.
Knowing that your past kind of can have an effect on
a
your future.
useful illusion kind of thing.
Exactly.
Although I will err on the side that he did believe in reincarnation. And
Sure,
I only
me
say
too.
that because the reason why I find it hard to believe is probably because I didn't grow up in an environment where it was taken for granted.
Which, like for
reincarnation
instance,
happens.
Eckham. Eckham's a religious Sikh, and everyone, in his culture, in his religion, believes in reincarnation, and he takes it absolutely for granted. He said he has 100% certainty about it, and his mind will not be changed.
Yeah, but I think he's lying to himself when he says 100% certainty.
Me too.
If you really pressed him, if you were to ask him, and I'll have to come back and talk to him.
Yeah.
I want to. And ask him, on a scale of 1 to 1 billion, are you 1,000,000,000% sure that everybody else is wrong?
Yeah.
Is it logically impossible that you could be wrong? Is there no logical way
Yeah.
that reincarnation could be false?
Right.
And the only way that he could say there's some point
Between here and a billion.
between here and 1 billion,
Yeah.
probably. And if he doesn't like that, say
Trillion.
Googleplex. There is some degree of doubt, unless he wants to say that he can extrapolate it from first principles and nothing to do with the nature of the world.
Yeah.
Right? It would mean in all logically possible worlds, reincarnation happens. You can't put beings in a world without reincarnation, right? And his certainty is that you can't have consciousness the way that we understand it without
reincarnation.
Without reincarnation.
Yeah.
And then he'll need to, in order to feel sure of that, he needs to explain that, at least to himself.
Here's the thing that I
And
think
he can't do that.
Here's the thing I think about
I'm-
people that are
I can't do
religious
that.
the way that he is. They have so much invested in the belief that what their God said, what their religion says is true, that they don't want to consider logically, could it be possible that reincarnation doesn't exist?
I'm
Because
sure he does. He's just people. We have adapted to the world to feel degrees of certainty in binary forms. The simple way to get through life is to be certain or not, right? But if you press anyone on anything, you'll realize that certainty actually is a measure. There's a degree of certainty.
that's right.
And you can't reach absolute certainty about things in the world outside of mathematics,
But that he psychologically relies on
Well, he
God said it, so
feels-
it's true.
He feels certainty, but that's
God
not the
said
same
it.
thing.
God
as-
said it, it's
yeah.
true.
Yeah, but how does he know God said it?
Because his gurus told him.
How does he know that the gurus?
Because the
told him what
gurus
God said?
the gurus are God incarnated. They have a direct line.
Okay, but how does he know what the guru said?
Because
read it.
people
You got
wrote it
from
down.
someone,
Yeah.
How
Because
does
it's
he know
true though.
that?
Because he said the guru said don't lie, and these non-liars wrote down. That's what I used to believe about Buddhism, right?
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. Well, I mean, don't lie is not the same command as don't be mistaken,
It's true.
right? So yeah, if you can work from first principles, that everything working its way back to the idea that of God, then you should be able to work from first principles up to get to reincarnation, and that's an immense undertaking that he hasn't done. he perhaps maybe somebody has done it.
Well,
I don't
here,
think we have the capacity for it.
when I
But
can
the
tell
fact
you
that he hasn't done it yet,
I can tell
should
you
leave some maybe infinitesimally small degree of uncertainty.
Yeah, I can tell you, though, why I believed in it and why I thought it was logical. Because, you know, the concept was that the mind is, this is how it's written in its poetic language, is the forerunner of all things. So basically what it's saying is that the mind is the primary thing. Yeah. The material, basically it's a kind of an idealism, philosophical idealism. Yeah. It's the idea that the entire,
that's correct, actually.
The entire material universe is part of the mind, and so, and therefore consciousness doesn't just end at death. Consciousness is just basically creating materiality, and then if it's still ignorant and clinging to its own existence, then the appearance in a new body is just, you know,
but
it would be necessary because it's not the material that's creating the mind, it's the mind that's...
Who's doing the appearing in the new body?
Well, because Buddhists say that there's no self,
of
right?
Reincarnation, like, you're begging the question, right? You're saying that that it must be the case that reincarnation is the case,
right?
Because if reincarnation is the case, then reincarnation is the case.
But here's the thing. No. So you have, first of all, the reason, according to this idealism, this point of view,
it's an idealism that I share.
Fine, but but according to the Buddhist one, right? Individuals like you and me, the reason why we are here, the reason why we have bodies and have, you know, everything that we have, is because we falsely believe in a self. And to truly understand that there is no self, because you talk to the average person, you and I are not the average people. You talk to the average people, they're gonna believe in an enduring self that is them, right? That was they were the same person when they were born. They'll be the same person when they die. They may or may not believe in an afterlife, but they believe in a self. And so it's this ignorance that causes continued existence as an individual.
Is reincarnation the continuation of the self that doesn't exist?
It's the continuation. It's the continuation of exactly what you and I are doing right now, and exactly what most people. So you and I, like I said, we're we're exceptions. We're exceptions because we don't think there's a self. But think of it this way: there's an ignorance.
Buddha didn't believe in the self. This is the thing that I don't understand. No. So what did he?
Yeah, but the Buddha also doesn't get reborn in any form.
Yeah.
And he said that's what happens when you abolish ignorance, when ignorance evaporates. There's no more taking birth because there's a realization of no self. It's the ignorance and the false belief in a self that causes the continuation of this individuated being.
I get it.
Yeah.
But basically, what he's saying, in effect, is reaching nibbana, freeing yourself of samskaras.
Yes.
It just leaves you with a soul, a self, that has no... Hang on, let me finish my point.
Sure.
Because what I'm saying is you're just arbitrarily matching up souls together where there's some scars fit, and
that's not the way it's understood.
The Buddha has no...
There's no matching up occurring.
But no, what I'm saying is...
There's no matching up.
I'm saying the matching up is just in your head, right? You're just as much... There's an infinite number of past beings that match up.
Forget about matching up. That's not... You have to try and think of it the way they think of it. I'm not saying it's correct.
No, what I'm saying is...
Forget about matching up.
When you take out the content... whether or not the person they wronged had blue eyes or brown eyes or whatever.
That's not important. We're talking about actual...
That's what I'm
saying. We're talking about actual existent beings. Like, forget about who matches up with who had blue eyes, who had brown eyes. What happens is that there is a you and there is a me right now ultimately, yeah, there is. You're sitting there. I'm sitting here. We're here.
Well, there's the illusion that's created of me.
Well, here's the thing. What you're saying right now. So the way my Buddhist teacher would say it, he said "Row, row, row your boat" is a fairly Buddhist song, okay? But it would be more Buddhist if it didn't say life is but a dream. So it's like you're saying life is but a dream. Life is an illusion. He's saying it. No, that's not what the Buddha's saying. Buddha's saying life is like a dream. It's like a dream because we're imagining that we are something that we're not.
Yeah.
But we are existing.
Yeah, but you're not imagining yourself being some past life.
Forget about that. Imagine this instead.
Well, no, the illusion doesn't include other people's illusions that happened to have the same soul as
Forget about other people. It's not like that.
But I'm talking about other lives
that
are supposed to share the same something.
No. Forget about that. Think of it this way. Think about the present moment. Because according to Buddhists, the present moment is all that exists, right? Mm-hmm. But as this present moment becomes the present moment now and the present moment now and the present moment now, eventually it'll get to a point where your body's going to die. And so what's going to happen in that moment is not your consciousness, the consciousness that you're experiencing is going to cease, but it's that consciousness is going to take up a new form instantaneously. That consciousness is going to find itself breathing inside of a womb.
But that consciousness has no content. That didn't bring the content with it.
The consciousness has content in each moment. In the present moment.
Yeah, and in the next moment after the death of one body,
right,
all of the content is wiped out, and you just have
maybe or maybe not.
Well,
because you're a consciousness that, like, I mean, you're conscious. There is consciousness that you're experiencing, and that consciousness, has had all of these experiences. And despite the fact that it finds itself in a new body and a new brain that's about to form a bunch of connections, that stream of consciousness still experienced and did everything that it did in that past life.
Same with the replica of myself.
Forget about replicas. There are no replicas. In the Buddhist conception, there aren't.
No. But this is my point. There can't be.
Can't be what?
In the Buddhist conception, it's logically impossible to have replicas, and I'm saying it's
logically
possible to have replicas.
No, it is. It's logically impossible for
share the same past lives.
No.
Well, where did the past lives come from person Z?
There is no person Z. Unless person Z...
Hang on. In my hypothetical, person X is reincarnated as person Y. Person Y is replicated to person Z.
There is no replication to person Z in Buddhist philosophy.
But what I'm saying is...
Yeah.
Okay. Forget the Buddhist philosophy part. We're talking about these two people have the same memories, the same inclinations.
The only way that I think that could happen is if there's only one way that could happen, and that's if there's two identical universes, because otherwise there wouldn't be two people exactly. There could be people that have...
In that first moment of consciousness, they would be discernible. They'd be two different people now who share the same history.
No. The only way that there's two people with the same history and the same body is if there's two identical universes occurring simultaneously, or before or after.
That's not true.
That's the only way. What? Okay, explain to me. How could you make a replica of a stream of someone who has an infinite stream of past lives? How are you going to replicate that?
You can't replicate the past lives. You replicate the memories, the muscle memory, all the content.
Yeah.
That's
here's
the illusion of the self that's projected in the mind.
Here's how that doesn't happen in the way Buddhists understand. It doesn't happen because you can't create consciousness.
You're begging the question.
Yeah, I am. Well, I'm saying that your scenario doesn't make sense to...
person Z would be a zombie. The lights wouldn't be on.
Yeah, there would be no consciousness there because there isn't a being to enter that body that you made. You can make a body, but you can make a brain, but unless there's a consciousness with an infinite past, there's no... Yeah, it's a zombie.
Do you see what I'm saying? the lights what the Buddhists can't explain
Yeah.
is what that light is.
No, they make something up. They make up that it's the forerunner of all things, that it has an infinite
Words.
past.
Those are words. That if you made a replica of a person using a replicator, like Star
You think
Trek,
it would be conscious? So what you're saying is you think that the brain produces consciousness, because that's a good question.
no, the brain definitely creates consciousness.
Good.
The-
I'm glad
it's-
we're back to
but-
reality.
Well, no, because I'm not a materialist either. The brain is a system of that creates predictive models of the world and projects like a singular world as if there's one world, right? Self-awareness, like our level of consciousness, includes modeling the modeler, right? It's creating predictive models of itself.
Yeah.
Right.
So you can
two
have-
mirrors pointed at itself, and it creates a projection of a singular world.
What you're saying is that you can have this representing of the environment
The illusion
without
can be
consciousness.
no,
Without consciousness.
No, the
You kind of can
illusion
in certain
can
ways.
be created. The illusion of consciousness is created by this contraption.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, what I'm saying though, let's go back to earlier forms of life, right? Earlier organisms. You can have them existing without consciousness, right? Do you think plants are conscious?
No.
Do you think
No,
there are?
Let's be clear on what we mean by the form of sentience that includes self-awareness.
Sure.
So the illusion of a singular self. No,
Right.
plants do not have that.
Right. So, and you're saying that arose at some point during evolution.
Yeah, but it's not a thing
During-
though. It's emergent.
Yeah,
Right.
that's what I'm saying.
Dogs have it partly,
Yeah.
right?
Anything with eyes has it, because there has to be something to see. I think so. No, because cameras.
There's sentience.
Cameras don't have. Yeah, sentience. That's what I'm talking about.
In a sentience comes in degrees, and plants have sentience. Watch sped up film of plants moving around their
In the
environment.
soil, they
Yeah.
look really alive. They're seeking food, evading each
That's
other.
sentience.
And
They're
stuff. Yeah.
responding to
Fighting-
a
fighting
model
wars.
of the world, and that model is stored in their chemistry and physical form.
Yeah,
and
well,
we're doing the same thing.
Sentience,
We're
but-
creating our model in the chemistry and physical form of our brain.
So you're saying plants are sentient?
They have a very low degree of sentience in the fact that they're creating a model of their
It's not just
environment.
chemical processes?
No, that is chemical processes.
Then it's not sentience. There's no one there. There's no lights on.
But now you're talking about self-awareness, where you're
Not
creating-
necessarily.
Yes.
I'm talking about any awareness or any sentience. Like,
But
I don't-
sentience and self-awareness are different. They're different in degrees to the point of being different.
is there
in
anything
kind.
that we call life that isn't sentient?
Well, the thing is
Any type
we
of
can't-
organism that's not
We can't define
sentient.
what we mean by life, right?
Well,
So,
a replicating, yeah, exactly, and that's what Richard Dawkins says in The Selfish Gene.
What I would say, because the thing is sentience isn't a thing in the world, and all of this confusion comes from trying to talk about an object that isn't an object. The phenomena of systems creating models of their environment, that process, greater complexity of that process leads to increasing sentience to the point where we're making models of the model, right? We're making, and human consciousness, we're modeling the modeler at a processing speed that it appears simultaneous. We witness ourselves making decisions, but we witness them after they've happened. The
Interesting, yeah.
decision that happened in the structure of your neurology. Think of your whole nervous system as being like a very complex plant, right? The information that is the model of the world is stored in the form of the dendrites and nerves and
So what my question
chemistries.
though is, at what level does any form of awareness of environment, like awareness, you're talking about modeling the modeler. I don't quite get how.
But you're talking
where-
about self-awareness.
No, I'm not talking about
you're
self-awareness.
talking,
I'm not.
Well, no, I'm telling you that you are.
No, I'm not. I'm talking about awareness
But
of
let me
anything. It doesn't
explain
have to be
how-
awareness of self. It can be awareness of warmth. Warm. It can be awareness of
A
warm.
plant can definitely be aware of warmth.
Interesting. That's my question.
That's why it
Where
moves
does
in the
awareness
direction.
begin? Do rocks have awareness?
No, because the only information stored in the form of a rock. There is information formed in this in the form that a particular rock has, and you can extrapolate from the form of a rock. Roughly.
The only reason I'm getting a little bit like excited when I talk is because I feel like I can't speak otherwise. Like you'll just talk.
Oh no, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
It's because I'm anticipating the way in which my language can be misunderstood.
Yeah.
And so I'm making assumptions about how you're misunderstanding me, because it's really difficult to make this distinction because we don't have the language for it. What I'm saying is, self-awareness includes a projection of an outside world, like information about our environment stored with such fidelity that it creates like a projection, like a replica of the sensory information that was received. But self-awareness includes another object. Part of the environment that it's mapping is the mapper, right? Part of so a dog, the predictive models that is being stored in the form of itself,
Yeah.
right, includes predictions about its body,
Yeah.
right? So it knows if it.
And this is all to do with the type of brain that the thing has evolved to have.
Every object stores information in terms of its form, right? There's information stored in the facts of the form of this object.
So there's a level of
that we
sentience.
can-
Are you
can
making
make-
the claim that there's a level
No,
of sentience
I'm
because there's
saying-
information
no,
stored?
No. What I'm saying is, sentience is not a thing that you have or don't have. When the information that's stored in the form of an object is complex enough, right? You get things like plants, amoebas, viruses. You increase the complexity. You get things like the human nervous system, which can store incredible amounts of information in really complex ways, where there's levels of abstraction way beyond an inanimate object that you could become if you do too much salvia, to virus, to plant. You get to dog, and part of the environment that's being modeled, a model is just information stored in some kind of isomorphic form, so that navigating that information is in a sense a simulation of navigating the world, right? So a plant will move towards warmth because stored in the form of that plant is the information that warmth is on this side, right? When you get to the level of a dog, part of the environment that is being modeled, like information being like some isomorphic informational structure being formed in its neurology and endocrine system and stuff, includes its own body, right? So its body is part of the environment that's being modeled. In humans and higher level of self-awareness, where we have complex ideas of self, we have a higher level of abstraction beyond just our bodies. We make predictive models of how we would feel if something happened. We have predictive models of our next moment. The thing is the decisions that we make, and this is you know this from neuroscience. Some listeners might find this really hard to believe, that we can watch the brain make decisions before we're aware that we've made them.
Up to 7
right?
seconds before, yeah.
That those decisions being made are an analogous or the same kind of phenomena as the plant moving in the direction of it's deciding to move in this direction because of information stored in its form. Our brain is doing the same thing. It's making decisions, moving in directions that are predetermined by its own structure and the information that it's taking in, and modeling in its own structure. And we witness it like a fraction of a second after it happens, and we're processing all this information so fast that the model of Michael Keeling is being compiled so fast I can't tell it from being simultaneous with the incoming information. I can't tell the difference between the incoming information about my world, including myself, and my experience of it, but there is a space, a fraction of a second between the plant moving towards the warmth and me experiencing the warmth. But this information processing system that is our nervous system happens so fast that the object being modeled experiences itself as being a thing, because it can't see the gap between the deterministic mechanism of just simply the form forming around the information coming in and the experiencing of the information that came in. The gap is so small that it feels like you're experiencing a single moment, but you're actually experiencing a fraction of a second of a moment ago. You might have to sit on that. I don't know.
That's awesome. I was going to say, I'm glad we got all this figured out. And I guess I don't have to do the podcast anymore, because I was trying to figure out,
You've already decided to do it.
Yeah, no, that was great, man. That's awesome. And definitely you should come back and we'll do it again with.
We should. Yeah. We'll have to listen to this over again, and then
I will
clarify some things to each other. And then maybe if somebody's dedicated enough to keep watching the podcast, they might be able to start making sense of some of the things that we're talking about.
For sure.
That's how I did it. It's the most complex things that I understand now was from finding all the ways to misunderstand it until I came to see some way of piecing things together to realize how I'm misunderstanding pieces. So
I think we should definitely get you on with that street preacher.
Oh yeah,
Ackham's buddy.
It's always been a hobby of mine. I've spent many hours on the corner talking to street preachers.
Yeah, that would be a good another 3-hour one. I think we hit the 3.5-hour mark.
Yeah, I need to eat.
Yeah.
So otherwise, I would I could talk myself to death.
Yeah.
If you didn't stop me, I'd die of starvation.
All right. Well, let's go eat. Michael, thank you very much for coming.
All right. Yeah. Thanks for having me.
All right.
Glad to be here.
Beautiful.